I never imagined that a family vacation to the Amalfi Coast would end with me discovering the ultimate betrayal. My mother-in-law had always been manipulative, but secretly transferring my dream villa to her name while we were celebrating my husband's birthday? That was a new low, even for Eleanor Blackwood. What she didn't know was that I had spent the last decade as a real estate lawyer, specializing in property fraud. Sometimes karma works in mysterious ways. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Villa Rosa, casting a warm glow across the terracotta tiles I'd personally selected 3 years ago. I stood in my favorite spot by the kitchen window, breathing in the scent of fresh coffee and jasmine from the garden below. This house was my sanctuary, my piece of paradise that I'd purchased with the inheritance my grandmother left me. If only I'd known then that it would become the centerpiece of the most devious plot I'd ever encountered. My name is Alexandra Chen, and I've spent my entire career helping people recover properties stolen through fraud and deception. The irony of my current situation isn't lost on me. As I sipped my coffee that morning, watching my husband Michael chat with his mother by the pool, I had no idea that Eleanor was already setting her plan in motion. "The notary will be here this afternoon to discuss the property tax adjustments," Eleanor called out, her voice carrying that false sweetness I'd grown to distrust over the years. "I can handle it, dear. You and Michael should enjoy your day." In Positano as planned. I nearly agreed. That's what haunts me the most about that morning, how close I came to falling into her trap. But something in her tone, a slight waver perhaps, caught my attention. In 15 years of practicing law, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people, and something felt off. "That's strange," I replied, keeping my voice casual as I walked onto the sun-drenched terrace. "The property taxes aren't due for review until next quarter." I watched Eleanor's perfectly manicured fingers tighten around her teacup, a subtle tell I might have missed if I hadn't spent years reading people across negotiating tables. Eleanor's face remained perfectly composed, a mask of maternal concern that had fooled my husband for decades. "Oh, didn't I mention? The local council is doing early assessments this year. Something about new tourism regulations." She waved, her hand dismissively, but I caught the quick glance she shared with her friend Patricia, who'd coincidentally decided to join us for this family vacation. Michael, ever the peacekeeper, smiled at both of us. "Mom's always thinking ahead, isn't she, Alex?" He squeezed my shoulder affectionately, completely missing the undercurrent of tension. "We should get going if we want to make our lunch reservation." I felt torn. The lawyer in me was screaming that something was wrong, but the wife in me didn't want to ruin our vacation with suspicion. Michael had been working so hard at the hospital, barely taking a day off in months. This trip was supposed to be our chance to reconnect, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. Eleanor must have sensed my hesitation. "Alexandra, darling," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "You work so hard, always thinking about legal matters, even on vacation. Let me take care of this small detail. Heaven knows I have plenty of experience managing properties." She smiled, reminding everyone present of her role as a successful real estate mogul back in Boston. That was her first mistake. In all my years of handling property fraud cases, I'd learned that the most dangerous predators are those who can't resist flaunting their expertise. They want you to know how clever they are, how many steps ahead they're thinking. It's often their undoing. I walked back into the villa, my mind racing. Through the open windows, I could hear Eleanor telling Michael how worried she was about my inability to relax and constant suspicion. Classic manipulation tactics. I'd seen them countless times in my practice, usually from family members trying to take advantage of their relatives. Standing in my office, I ran my fingers along the spines of the property documents I kept. Meticulously organized. Everything about the villa was in perfect order. I'd made sure of that after seeing too many clients lose their homes to administrative oversights. The deed, the tax records, the utility bills, all properly filed, and registered with multiple copies stored digitally. As I pulled out the property folder, a small business card fluttered to the floor. Picking it up, I smiled, remembering the local lawyer who had helped me with the purchase 3 years ago. Marco Rossi. He'd impressed me with his thoroughness and integrity. On an impulse, I snapped a photo of his card with my phone. Something told me I might need an ally sooner rather than later. "Alex?" Michael's voice echoed from the terrace. "Are you ready to go?" I took one last look at the property documents before locking them securely in my desk. "Coming!" I called back, grabbing my sun hat and bag. As I walked back outside, I caught Eleanor watching me with an expression I'd seen many times before, not on her face, but on the faces of countless fraudsters I'd confronted in court. It was the look of someone who thought they had everything perfectly planned out. What Eleanor didn't realize was that she wasn't dealing with just another daughter-in-law. She was up against someone who had spent their entire career unraveling schemes exactly like the one she was plotting. But for now, I would play along. After all, the best way to catch a predator is to let them think they're the one doing the hunting. As we drove away from Villa Rosa, I watched Eleanor and Patricia in the rearview mirror, already huddled together in conversation. I squeezed Michael's hand, feeling a pang of sadness for the storm I knew was coming. Our perfect family vacation was about to turn into something else entirely, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse where the prize was not just a beautiful villa, but the truth about the woman who had manipulated our family for years. Little Lau. Did I know this was just the beginning of a story that would test not only my professional skills, but every relationship I held dear? The drive to Positano should have been beautiful. The winding coastal road offered breathtaking views of the Mediterranean, with colorful villages clinging to the cliffs like vibrant jewelry on a queen's neck. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying every interaction with Eleanor over the past few days, searching for clues I might have missed. "You're awfully quiet," Michael observed, navigating another hairpin turn. "Still thinking about those property taxes?" I forced a smile, wondering how to explain my suspicions without sounding paranoid. After all, Eleanor had spent years cultivating her image as the perfect mother, generous, caring, always putting family first. How could I tell my husband that I suspected his mother was trying to steal my property? "Just wondering why the notary would come during our vacation," I said, cheerfully. "It seems odd timing," Michael chuckled. "That's Mom for you, always mixing business with pleasure. Remember when she tried to close a real estate deal during our wedding reception?" I remembered all too well. Eleanor had disappeared for an hour, claiming she needed to take an important call. We later discovered she'd sold a prime piece of Boston real estate to one of our wedding guests, property that had mysteriously belonged to her business partner just days before. As we parked in Positano, my phone buzzed. A text from Marco Rossi. "Signora Chen, received your message. Very concerning. No official notice of tax reassessment in this region. Can meet tomorrow morning?" My heart raced. I'd sent him a quick email during the drive, asking about any local property tax changes. His response confirmed my worst fears. Eleanor was lying about the reason for the notary's visit. "Darling, look." Michael pointed to a charming restaurant, perched on the cliff edge. "Mom made us lunch reservations there. She says the owner is an old friend." Of course he was. Eleanor's old friends had a habit of appearing at convenient moments, usually armed with documents needing signatures or urgent business proposals. I'd seen similar tactics in my cases: create a relaxed atmosphere, add alcohol, then casually introduce paperwork. The restaurant owner, Giuseppe, greeted us with excessive enthusiasm. "Ah, you must be Eleanor's son. She told me all about you this morning." This morning? When had Eleanor spoken to him? She'd been at the villa with us since dawn. Another small detail that didn't quite fit. As we were seated at the best table in the house, my phone buzzed again. An email from my office back in Boston. Urgent. Notice of power of attorney filing for Villa Rosa property. Required your immediate attention. My hands trembled as I read the message. A power of attorney would give Eleanor the authority to act on my behalf, including transferring property ownership. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was disturbing. "Everything okay?" Michael asked, noticing my expression. "Just work," I lied, hating myself for it. But I needed more evidence before I could confront Eleanor. In my experience, premature accusations only gave fraudsters time to cover their tracks. Giuseppe appeared with a bottle of wine. "Compliments of your mother," he announced proudly. I noticed him slip something into Michael's pocket as he leaned over to pour. My husband seemed oblivious, but I'd seen enough sleight of hand in my profession to recognize a document handoff. "Michael," I said suddenly, "would you mind if we skipped the wine? I have a bit of a headache." His face fell slightly. "Are you sure? Mom specifically recommended this vintage." "I'm sure she did," I murmured. Eleanor knew I never discussed business after drinking, another detail she was trying to use to her advantage. Throughout lunch, I watched Michael's hand occasionally drift to his pocket, as if checking that whatever Giuseppe had slipped him was still there. My husband was a brilliant surgeon, but he was terribly naive when it came to his mother's manipulations. I excused myself to use the restroom, and as I passed the kitchen, I heard Giuseppe on the phone. "Si, Signora Blackwood. They are here now. Si, everything is arranged for this afternoon." My legal training kicked in. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Evidence could be crucial later. Giuseppe's voice continued. "The documents are with him." "No, she hasn't had any wine. Perhaps the notary should wait." I'd heard enough. Returning to the table, I found Michael looking thoughtfully at a set of papers. "Mom just texted," he said. "Apparently there's some urgent paperwork I need to sign as a witness for the tax assessment. She's having the notary meet us here instead of at the villa. More convenient, she says." I took a deep breath. This was the moment. I could expose Eleanor's plot now, show Michael the evidence I'd gathered. But I knew from experience that timing was everything in these situations. If I moved too soon, Eleanor would have time to adapt her strategy. Additionally, I needed to protect my husband from the immediate shock of his mother's betrayal. "Actually," I said, reaching for my water glass, "I'm not feeling very well. Would you mind if we headed back to the villa? We can deal with the paperwork." There. Michael's concern was immediate and genuine. This was why I loved him. Despite his blind spot regarding his mother, his care for others was real. "Of course, I'll call Mom and let her know." As we drove back along the coastal road, I mentally reviewed my options. I had Marco Rossi's support, documentation of the suspicious power of attorney filing, and a recording of Giuseppe's conversation. But I knew Eleanor wouldn't go down without a fight. She hadn't built her real estate empire by giving up easily. What I needed now was to understand the full scope of her plan. In my experience, people like Eleanor always had multiple schemes running simultaneously. The tax assessment story was clearly a fake, but what was her real endgame? And more importantly, how could I expose it without destroying my husband's relationship with his mother? As Villa Rosa came into view, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway. Through the front window, I could see Eleanor and Patricia speaking with a man in a suit, presumably the notary. They were gathered around my desk where I kept all my property documents. Game on, Eleanor, I thought. Let's see who's better at this. A manipulative mother-in-law or a lawyer who's spent her career fighting property fraud? As we pulled into the driveway, Eleanor burst out of the front door, her designer sundress fluttering in the coastal breeze. "Oh, you're back early. Is everything all right?" Her voice carried that practiced note of concern, but I caught the flash of annoyance in her eyes. "Alexandra isn't feeling well," Michael explained, helping me from the car despite my protests. I was playing up the illness slightly, but it gave me a perfect excuse to head straight to my office. "Oh dear," Eleanor cooed. "Perhaps you should lie down, Alexandra. We can handle all the tedious paperwork without troubling you." She gestured to the man in the suit, who was now hovering in the doorway. "Mr. Romano has been so patient, waiting, to handle these tax matters." I straightened up, summoning my courtroom demeanor. "Actually, I'm feeling much better, and as the property owner, I should really be present for any tax discussions." I watched Mr. Romano's expression carefully, as I emphasized property owner. His slight flinch told me everything I needed to know. Inside my office, I immediately noticed the subtle signs of disturbance. My files were arranged at a slightly different angle, the computer mouse was on the wrong side of the keyboard, and, most tellingly, the security camera I'd discreetly installed in the bookshelf was now facing a different direction. "Before we begin," I said, taking my seat behind the desk, "I'd like to see your notary credentials, Mr. Romano." Eleanor jumped in before he could respond. "Alexandra, really? Mr. Romano is a highly respected professional. I've worked with him many times." "Then he won't mind showing his credentials," I replied smoothly, pulling out my phone. "I can also call the local notary association to verify his standing. Standard procedure in international property matters, as I'm sure you know." Mr. Romano cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should reschedule. I have another appointment." "No!" Eleanor's outburst was sharp enough to make Michael jump. She quickly composed herself. "I mean, we've already taken up so much of Mr. Romano's time." I turned to my computer, making a show of logging in. "Let me just pull up the tax assessment. Notice. Oddly, I haven't received any official communication about this." I watched Eleanor's reflection in the monitor as she exchanged a panicked glance with Patricia. "There's been so much mail lately," Patricia offered quickly. "Perhaps it got mixed up with the resort advertisements?" I opened my email, clicking through to the message from my office. "Speaking of official communications, I just received an interesting notice about a power of attorney filing." I looked directly at Eleanor. "Would you know anything about that?" The color drained from Eleanor's perfectly made-up face, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, that old thing. Just a precaution, dear. In case anything happened to you during our vacation. You know how dangerous these mountain roads can be." Michael frowned. "Mom, what are you talking about? What power of attorney?" Before Eleanor could respond, my phone buzzed. Marco Rossi's name flashed on the screen, along with a message that made my heart race. "Documents found. Attempted property transfer filed this morning. Meeting now." "Mr. Romano," I said, standing up, "I suggest you leave now. Taking part in fraudulent property transfers is a serious offense in Italy. I'm sure you wouldn't want to risk your reputation." The fake notary didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his briefcase and practically ran from the room, ignoring Eleanor's protests. "Would someone please explain what's going on?" Michael demanded, looking between his mother and me. Eleanor switched tactics, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was only trying to protect our family interests. Alexandra, with her busy career, can hardly manage a property in Italy. I was simply trying to help." "By filing a fraudulent power of attorney?" I pulled up the documents on my computer. "By attempting to transfer my villa into your name." "That's not help, Eleanor. That's theft." Michael staggered back as if he'd been struck. "Mom, is this true?" Eleanor's tears vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Her voice turned cold, calculating, the real Eleanor finally emerging. "You never deserved this property, or my son. I built an empire from nothing, and you swoop in with your grandmother's money and your law degree, thinking you belong in our world." "The property is in my name," I stated firmly. "Purchased legally with my inheritance. Your attempt to transfer it won't work." Eleanor's laugh was chilling. "Won't it? Check your deed again, dear. While you and Michael were enjoying your romantic lunch, I had plenty of time to make some adjustments." Amazing what the right connections can accomplish in a small Italian town. My blood ran cold. I yanked open my desk drawer where I kept the original deed. The folder was there, but something felt wrong. The paper was slightly different, the watermark just a bit off. Looking for this? Patricia pulled a document from her designer handbag, the original deed. Eleanor was right. You really should. Be more careful with important papers. Michael finally found his voice. Stop this, Mom. Whatever you're doing, just stop. Eleanor turned to him, her expression softening. Darling, I'm protecting your interests. What if she divorces you? This property should stay in our family. Our family? I couldn't hold back my bitter laugh. You mean your control, just like every other property you've manipulated away from people who trusted you. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Careful, Alexandra. You're not the only one who can do research. I know about the cases you've handled, the people you've investigated. It would be a shame if certain parties learned their confidential information had been compromised. And there it was, the real threat behind the property theft. Eleanor hadn't just been busy this morning. She'd been laying groundwork for a much bigger attack on my professional reputation. But as I looked at her smug expression, I felt a surge of calm. Because Eleanor had just made the classic mistake I'd seen countless times in my career. She'd revealed her hand too soon, thinking she had already won. What she didn't know was that I had my own connections in Italy, and Marco Rossi wasn't just any local lawyer. He was the man who had helped bring down one of the biggest property fraud rings on the Amalfi Coast 3 years ago. I reached for my phone, maintaining eye contact with Eleanor as I pressed the record button. Tell me more about these adjustments you made to my deed. I'm sure the Italian financial police would be very interested in hearing the details. Eleanor's composure cracked for just a moment as she registered the phone in my hand, but she quickly recovered, her socialite's mask sliding back into place. Really, Alexandra? Recording people without their consent? I expected better from someone of your professional standing. Italy is a one-party consent state for recordings, I replied, calmly, years of courtroom experience keeping my voice steady, as I'm sure your friend Mr. Romano could have told you, if he were a real notary. Michael moved to stand between us, his surgeon's hands trembling slightly. Both of you, stop this. There must be some reasonable explanation. Oh, there is, Patricia interjected, still clutching my original deed. Your wife has been squatting in a prime piece of real estate that should rightfully belong to the Blackwood family. Eleanor is simply correcting that oversight. I turned to my computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. Interesting perspective, Patricia. Almost as interesting as your recent disbarment in Massachusetts for participating in fraudulent property schemes. Did Eleanor promise you a percentage of Villa Rosa in exchange for your help? Patricia's smug expression faltered. Eleanor shot her a warning look, but it was too late. I'd seen the guilt flash across her face. You did your homework, Eleanor conceded, her voice taking on an almost admiring tone. But you're playing in a league you don't understand, dear. Do you really think I came to Italy without making certain arrangements? That property deed Patricia's holding isn't the only documentation we have. My phone buzzed again. Marco Rossi. Local registry office confirms attempted transfer this morning. Have contacted Guardia di Finanza. Don't let them leave property. I allowed myself a small smile. You mean the forged documents you filed with the local registry office this morning? The ones that are currently being investigated by the Guardia di Finanza, Italy's financial police? For the first time, real fear flickered in Eleanor's eyes. She grabbed her designer handbag, shooting a meaningful look at Patricia. Michael, darling, your wife is obviously disturbed, making wild accusations, threatening your mother. Perhaps that's something you should consider carefully. The only thing I'm considering, Michael said quietly, is how many other properties you've stolen this way, Mom. Eleanor recoiled as if she'd been slapped. I built everything I have. Through hard work and intelligent investments. Like the Madison Avenue property? I interrupted. The one that mysteriously transferred from your business partner's name after he died? Or the Cape Cod estate that belonged to your sister until you became her power of attorney during her illness? You've been investigating. Me? Eleanor's voice rose sharply. Your own mother-in-law? No, Eleanor. I've been doing my job. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the same patterns I've spent my career fighting against? The only difference is, most fraudsters don't target their own family. The distant sound of sirens drifted through the open windows. Patricia moved toward the door, but I held up my hand. I wouldn't leave just yet. The Guardia di Finanza will have questions about your role in this attempted fraud. Fraud? Eleanor laughed, but there was a hysterical edge to it. I was protecting our family legacy. Michael, surely you understand. Everything I've done has been for you. For our family. Name. Michael walked to my desk, picking up a framed photo of our wedding day. Eleanor stood beside us in the picture, beaming with practiced maternal pride. Our family name? He said softly. Or your reputation, Mom? How many other properties in your empire actually belong to other people? Don't be dramatic, Eleanor snapped. Business is business. Sometimes people make poor decisions, overextend themselves. I simply help them out of difficult situations. By stealing their property, I finished for her. That's not business, Eleanor. That's fraud. And unlike your other victims, I have the expertise to prove it. The sirens were getting closer. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hands clenched around her bag. Patricia, call Giuseppe. Tell him to bring the car around back. Giuseppe won't be coming, I interrupted. He's probably busy explaining to the authorities why he helped you forge property documents. Eleanor's composure finally shattered. You think you're so clever, don't you? The brilliant lawyer, always fighting for justice. But you have no idea what it takes to build something real, something lasting. I grew up with nothing, married into the Blackwood name, spent decades building my reputation. By destroying other people's lives? Michael's voice cracked. How many, Mom? How many people have you done this to? Before Eleanor could answer, the sound of cars pulling up outside filled the room. Through the window, I could see several official vehicles, including one marked with the distinctive insignia of the Guardia di Finanza. That's what we're about to find out, I said, standing up. Eleanor Blackwood, you've spent years taking advantage of people's trust, using your social status and family connections to steal their properties. But you made one crucial mistake this time. And what's that? She sneered, though her face had gone pale. You tried to steal from someone who knows exactly how you operate, someone who made sure to document every step of your attempted fraud, and someone who happens to have very good connections with the Italian authorities. Heavy footsteps sounded on the villa's stairs. Eleanor looked frantically between the door and the balcony, as if calculating her chances of escape. Patricia had sunk into a chair, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. As the officers entered the room, led by Marco Rossi and two stern-faced financial police investigators, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for my husband, whose world was about to shatter even further. But as Michael squeezed my hand, I knew we would get through this together. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, trying to summon her socialite's dignity one last time. But as the officers began reading her rights in rapid Italian, the facade finally crumbled completely, revealing the desperate fraudster she'd been all along. The next few hours passed in a blur of statements and document reviews. At the Guardia di Finanza officers transformed my sunny villa office into an impromptu investigation headquarters, with papers spread across every surface and rapid-fire Italian conversations filling the air. Marco Rossi moved between groups, translating and explaining the complexities of international property law. I watched as the officers led Eleanor and Patricia away in separate cars, their designer resort wear looking oddly out of place against the official vehicles. Eleanor had maintained her silence, but her eyes promised retribution. Patricia, on the other hand, had crumbled completely, already offering to reveal everything in exchange for leniency. Michael stood at the window long after the cars disappeared down the winding coastal road, his shoulders rigid with tension. As a surgeon, he was used to handling crises, but this was different. No amount of medical training could prepare you for watching your mother being arrested for fraud. Signora Chen, one of the senior investigators, approached me, his English heavily accented. We found something interesting in your mother-in-law's tablet. Messages about other properties. Many. Properties, not just in Italy. He handed me the device, open to an email folder labeled Investment Opportunities. As I scrolled through the messages, my professional instincts kicked into high gear. There were dozens of conversations with various associates across Europe and the United States, all following the same pattern I'd seen in my own case. Look at this, I called to Michael, who joined me at the desk. Your mother has been running this scheme for years. She finds properties owned by vulnerable people. Those going through divorces, dealing with illnesses, or facing financial troubles. Then she swoops in, using a network of corrupt officials and lawyers to transfer the properties to her name. Michael's face grew paler with each scroll. That villa in Tuscany. That belonged to Dad's college friend Richard. Mom told everyone. He'd sold it to her before his cancer diagnosis. He ran a hand through his hair, realization dawning. Richard's widow kept insisting there had been no sale, but everyone thought she was just confused from grief. Marco Rossi appeared at my elbow, peering at the tablet. This explains much about certain property transfers along the coast. We've suspected a organized fraud ring, but could never prove the connection. He pointed to a name in one email. This notary here. We've investigated him before, but evidence always disappeared before charges could be filed. The sound of breaking glass made us all jump. Patricia's abandoned wine glass had finally toppled off the desk, shattering on the terracotta tiles. The sound seemed to break something in Michael, too. I need some air, he muttered, heading for the door. I moved to follow him, but Marco caught my arm. Alexandra, there's something else you need to see first. He pulled up another email on the tablet, this one dated just 2 weeks before our vacation. It seems Villa Rosa wasn't a sudden opportunity. Your mother-in-law has been planning this for months. The email chain revealed an elaborate scheme. Eleanor had specifically chosen Italy for our vacation, knowing the local property laws would make her fraud harder to trace. She'd spent weeks establishing connections with corrupt officials, setting up fake documentation, and even hiring people to pose as legitimate property authorities. She used our anniversary trip to steal my home, I whispered, the full scope of her manipulation becoming clear. She probably suggested Italy in the first place. Actually, Marco said grimly, according to these messages, she chose Villa Rosa as your honeymoon gift 3 years ago specifically because she knew the property values in this area would skyrocket. She's been waiting for the right moment to take it ever since. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Our entire history with this house, the joy of our honeymoon, the holidays we'd spent here, the memories we'd made, had all been part of Eleanor's long game. She hadn't just tried to steal my property. She'd orchestrated our connection to it from the very beginning. I found Michael in the garden, sitting on the stone bench where just that morning he'd been chatting happily with his mother. The evening sun cast long shadows across the immaculate lawn Eleanor had insisted on having landscaped last summer. Another part of her master plan, I now realized. She chose this place, Michael said as I sat beside him. It wasn't a question. All those times she talked about family traditions, about passing the villa down to our future children. She was just waiting to steal it. I took his hand, feeling the slight tremor in his surgeon's fingers. The property scheme is probably just the beginning. The investigators think she's been running similar frauds all over Europe. Michael let out a bitter laugh. You know what the worst part is? I'm not even surprised. There were always whispers about Mom's business dealings, rumors about how she acquired certain properties. But she was so good at explaining things away, at making anyone who questioned her seem like they were just jealous or confused. That's how skilled fraudsters operate, I said gently. They build a reputation that makes them seem above suspicion. They use their social status as a shield. All those charity galas she hosted, the hospital wings she donated to. Michael shook his head. How much of that was built on stolen property? On ruined lives? Before I could answer, Marco appeared in the garden doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but the investigators have more questions. They're particularly interested in a series of properties in the Hamptons. Something about a cancer patient's widow? Michael stood up, squaring his shoulders. Richard's wife, Susan, I think. I think it's time I gave her a call. He turned to me, his eyes full of determination. We need to make this right, Alex. All of it. Every property, every person my mother has hurt. They deserve to know the truth. As we walked back into the villa, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the window. Michael and I moving forward together despite the chaos Eleanor had unleashed. She had tried to destroy our home, our relationship, our trust in family. Instead, she had only succeeded in revealing her true nature and strengthening our resolve to fight against the very fraud she had perfected. The sun was setting over the Amalfi Coast, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Tomorrow would bring more investigations, more revelations, more painful conversations. But for now, we had our truth, our integrity, and most importantly, we had each other. Eleanor's perfect plan hadn't just failed, it had backfired spectacularly, exposing decades of fraud and manipulation. As Marco laid out more documents on my desk, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Eleanor had tried to use my dream villa as a weapon against me, never realizing that in doing so, she would bring down her entire empire of lies. The next morning dawned with a flurry of phone calls. News of Eleanor Blackwood's arrest had spread through her social circles like wildfire, and my phone hadn't stopped ringing since sunrise. Most calls came from journalists seeking comments, but some were from familiar names in Eleanor's world, people who suddenly remembered concerning interactions with my mother-in-law. That's the 5th call from the Boston Gazette, Michael noted, bringing me a fresh cup of coffee in my villa office. The room still showed signs of yesterday's chaos, with official documents scattered across every surface. They're running a story about Mom's real estate empire built on sand. Their words, not mine. I took a sip of coffee, scanning through. The latest email from my law firm back in Boston. It's not just the press. The FBI has opened an investigation into her U.S. properties. Apparently, they've been watching her for months, but could never prove anything concrete. Until now, Marco added, entering with a thick folder. He'd been working through the night, coordinating with various European authorities. Your mother-in-law's tablet is proving to be a gold mine of evidence. She documented everything meticulously, probably thought it made her look like a legitimate businesswoman. The folder he placed on my desk contained printouts of Eleanor's private records. Each page revealed a new layer of deception. Shell companies, forged documents, manipulated property records. But what caught my eye was a familiar name on one of the documents. Michael, I called softly. Isn't this your father's signature? He leaned over my shoulder, frowning at the document. That's impossible. Dad died 6 years ago, but this transfer is dated just last year. Marco peered at the signature. A forgery, obviously, but a very good one. Your mother must have kept examples of his signature to use after his death. Michael sank into a chair, his face ashen. She used Dad's name to steal properties even after he died? That's That's a whole new level of betrayal. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia's lawyer. She was ready to talk, to reveal everything she knew about Eleanor's operations in exchange for a deal. The message included a list of names, potential victims of Eleanor's schemes. Look at this. I showed Michael the list. Richard's widow isn't the only one. There's the Hendersons' beach house, the Wilsons' ski lodge, properties we've visited, places where Eleanor hosted parties and charity events. All stolen, Michael finished, his voice hollow. She paraded her victims through their own stolen homes, probably laughed about it later. A knock at the door interrupted us. One of the financial police officers entered, carrying Eleanor's laptop. Signora Chen, we found something interesting. Multiple emails about a property in Switzerland. A ski resort? I felt Michael stiffen beside me. The Alpine Grove Resort? But that belongs to my cousin Thomas. Mom just manages it for him while he's working in Singapore. The officer shook, his head placing the laptop on my desk. According to these documents, your cousin no longer owns the resort. The transfer was completed 3 months ago using a power of attorney document with his signature. But Thomas would never... Michael trailed off, realization dawning. He's been in Singapore for 2 years. The perfect target. Family member. Too far away to check property records regularly. I scrolled through the emails, my legal training helping me piece together Eleanor's method. She used the same technique she tried here. Forged documents? Corrupt officials? Careful timing. Thomas probably has no idea he's lost his resort. I need to call him, Michael said, pulling out his phone. But what do I even say? Hey, cousin, remember that resort you inherited from Grandpa? Well, Mom stole it using your forged signature while you were building hospitals in Asia. Marco cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on gathering evidence first. These property transfers might be complex, but they leave paper trails. Your mother was thorough in her documentation, probably her biggest mistake. I nodded, already formulating a plan. We need to contact every person on Patricia's list, cross-reference them with the properties mentioned in Eleanor's emails. There could be dozens of victims who don't even know they've been robbed. The Boston DA's office is already involved, Michael added, reading from his phone. They're calling it one of the largest property fraud schemes they've seen. Mom's face is all over the morning news. Another officer appeared with more documents. We found a safe in Senora Blackwood's room at the villa. More property deeds, passports, and this. He handed me a worn leather journal. The journal was old, the pages yellowed with age. As I opened it, Eleanor's precise handwriting filled each page, detailed notes about potential targets, vulnerability assessments, strategy outlines. It was a blueprint for her entire operation, dating back nearly 20 years. She was proud of it, I realized, feeling sick. She documented everything because she saw herself as some kind of property acquisition genius. These aren't just records, they're her achievements. Michael took the journal, his hands trembling slightly as he read. There are notes about Dad here, about how she convinced him her methods were just aggressive business tactics. She manipulated everyone, even her own husband. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the mountain of evidence spread across my office. Each document represented a shattered life, a stolen dream, a betrayed trust. Eleanor hadn't just built an empire of fraud. She'd created a monument to her own ruthlessness. We need to make this right, I said firmly, gathering the documents into organized piles. Every property, every victim, every forged signature, we'll uncover it all. Eleanor's empire isn't just going to fall, it's going to be dismantled piece by piece, and everything will be returned to its rightful owners. Michael squeezed my hand, his medical training evident in his steady grip. Where do we start? I held up Patricia's list of names. We start with the people we know. Richard's widow, Thomas, the Hendersons. Each story we uncover will lead to more. Eleanor's house of cards is about to come crashing down, and we need to be there to help the people buried in the rubble. As Marco began making calls to various European authorities, I couldn't help but marvel at the irony. Eleanor had targeted my villa thinking I was just another naive property owner, never realizing she was handing me the key to destroying her entire criminal enterprise. Sometimes, I reflected, justice arrives in unexpected ways. The afternoon brought a series of video calls that none of us were truly prepared for. Thomas, Michael's cousin, appeared on my laptop screen from his Singapore apartment, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by shocked disbelief as we explained the situation. "I trusted her," he kept repeating, running his hands through his disheveled hair. That resort was Dad's legacy. He spent his whole life building it up from nothing. When he died, Aunt Eleanor promised to look after it while I was in Asia. She said it was her way of honoring his memory. I watched Michael's face as his cousin spoke, seeing the same pain I'd witnessed when Eleanor was arrested. Every new revelation seemed to cut deeper, revealing another layer of his mother's betrayal. "We'll get it back, Thomas," I assured him, my lawyer's instincts already mapping out the legal strategy. "Eleanor's documented everything. Her own records will be her undoing." As if to prove my point, Marco appeared with another stack of papers from Eleanor's safe. "Financial records," he explained, spreading them across the desk. "Your mother-in-law kept detailed accounts of every property she acquired, including profits from Thomas's resort." The numbers were staggering. Eleanor hadn't just stolen the properties. She'd been generating significant income from them, all while maintaining the facade of managing them for their rightful owners. In Thomas's case alone, the resort had produced millions in revenue over the past 3 months, money that had disappeared into Eleanor's web of offshore accounts. Our next call was with Susan, Richard's widow. The moment her face appeared on screen, I understood why Eleanor had targeted her. Still grieving her husband's death, clearly overwhelmed by the complexities of property management, she was exactly the kind of vulnerable victim Eleanor preferred. "I knew something wasn't right," Susan said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "The documents Eleanor showed me after Richard died, they didn't make sense. But everyone kept telling me I was just confused, that grief was affecting my judgment. Even my own children eventually believed her over me." Michael leaned into the camera view. "I'm so sorry, Susan. We all believed her. She was so convincing, so practiced at making anyone who questioned her seem unreasonable." A sharp knock interrupted our call. One of the financial police officers entered, holding Eleanor's phone. "Scusi, but you need to see this. She's been sending messages from custody." The messages were directed to various associates, written in a code that would have seemed like innocent social chatter to anyone else. But thanks to Eleanor's detailed records, we could decipher their true meaning. Instructions to hide assets, destroy documents, and silence potential witnesses. "She's still trying to maintain control," I marveled, reading through the messages. "Even from a jail cell, she's working to protect her empire." Marco was already on his own phone, alerting the authorities. "We'll need to move quickly. Some of these associates might still be loyal to her." As if to underscore his point, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Patricia had been found unconscious in her holding cell, an apparent suicide attempt. But given Eleanor's messages, I wondered if it was really an attempt at all, or a warning to others who might consider talking. "This is bigger than we thought," Michael said quietly, staring at the messages on Eleanor's phone. "Mom's not just a fraudster. She's running some kind of organized crime network." The evidence supported his conclusion. Eleanor's records revealed a complex organization, corrupt officials in multiple countries, a network of fake notaries and lawyers, even blackmail material on people she considered potential threats. She hadn't just stolen properties. She'd built an international criminal enterprise under the guise of legitimate business. Another video call connected, this time from the Hendersons. Their story was painfully familiar: a family vacation home, lost during a financial crisis, Eleanor swooping in with offers of help, documents signed under duress. But they had something the other victims didn't: security camera footage from the day Eleanor executed her takeover. "We installed cameras after a break-in," Mrs. Henderson explained, her voice shaking. "Never imagined they'd catch something like this." The footage showed Eleanor in the Henderson study, carefully replacing their property deed with a forged version while they were distracted by a staged plumbing emergency in another part of the house. She moved with practiced efficiency, suggesting this wasn't the first time she'd pulled such a switch. "Look at the date stamp," Marco pointed out. "This was just 2 weeks before she tried the same thing here at Villa Rosa. She must have been feeling confident after succeeding with the Hendersons." Mrs. Henderson leaned closer to her camera. "There's something else you should know. Eleanor didn't act alone. She had help from someone in our local government office. Someone who made sure the property transfer wouldn't raise any red flags." As she spoke, I remembered something from Eleanor's journal: a list of names under the heading "Reliable Friends." Cross-referencing it with her tablet's contacts revealed a disturbing pattern. Government officials, bank managers, even judges, all potentially complicit in her schemes. "We need to compile everything," I decided, already creating a digital folder. Every victim's statement, every piece of evidence, every connection in her network. Eleanor's not just going down for attempting to steal my villa. She's going to answer for every property she's ever stolen. Michael nodded, his doctor's compassion evident as he spoke to the Hendersons. "We'll make this right. All of it. Mom's victims deserve justice and they deserve their homes back." As we ended the call, I caught sight of our reflection in the Villa's windows. Michael and I surrounded by evidence of his mother's crimes, working to unravel decades of fraud. Eleanor had tried to steal my home, but in doing so, she'd given us the tools to dismantle her entire criminal empire. The sun was setting over the Amalfi Coast, casting long shadows across the piles of documents that would seal Eleanor's fate. Tomorrow would bring more victims, more stories, more evidence of her crimes. But for now, we had made a start. The victims were finding their voices, and Eleanor's carefully constructed world of lies was crumbling one testimony at a time. Dinner time had come and gone, but none of us had thought about food. The villa's kitchen, usually filled with the aroma of Italian cooking, remained cold and unused. Instead, we huddled around my office desk, where Detective Isabella Romano of the Guardia di Finanza had just delivered news that changed everything. "We found a hidden safe deposit box in Naples," she announced, placing a USB drive on my desk. "The contents are disturbing. Your mother-in-law wasn't just stealing properties, she was using them to launder money for some very dangerous people." Michael, who had been holding up remarkably well considering the circumstances, went pale. "What kind of dangerous people?" Detective Romano glanced at Marco, who nodded grimly. "International criminal organizations. They would provide the capital for her property schemes, and she would use her social status and business connections to clean their money through real estate transactions." The USB drive contained spreadsheets detailing millions in transactions, all carefully disguised as legitimate property deals. Eleanor had been meticulous in her record-keeping, perhaps never imagining that her own documentation would expose her crimes. "There's more," Detective Romano continued. "We intercepted a phone call from prison. Your mother was trying to arrange something called Protocol Blackwood. Does that mean anything to you?" Michael shook his head, but I noticed Marco suddenly tense up. "What is it?" I asked him. "In my years investigating property fraud, I've heard whispers about a protocol, a fail-safe mechanism some criminals use. If they're caught, they trigger a series of prearranged actions: evidence destruction, witness intimidation, asset liquidation." As if on cue, My phone lit up with a news alert. The headline made my blood run cold. Massive fire at Boston. Real estate office. Blackwood Properties headquarters destroyed. It's starting, Marco said quietly. She's burning it all down rather than let us expose the truth. Michael grabbed his own phone, frantically dialing. I need to warn Thomas. If Mom's triggering some kind of failsafe, his resort could be next. But before he could connect, all the lights in the villa went out. We sat in sudden darkness, the only illumination coming from our phone screens. Outside, the usual ambient sounds of the coastal evening were replaced by an eerie silence. This is no coincidence, Detective Romano said, already moving toward the door. Everyone stay here. I'll check the power box. But I was already putting the pieces together. The power outage, the timing, Eleanor's mysterious protocol. It all fit a pattern I'd seen in my legal cases. Wait, I called out. Check the safe in Eleanor's room first. This could be a diversion. Two officers rushed upstairs while Marco used his phone's flashlight to illuminate the room. In the harsh beam, I noticed something odd about the pile of documents we'd been reviewing. They seemed disturbed, as if someone had quickly rifled through them in the darkness. The windows, Michael suddenly said. Look at the garden. Through the villa's large windows, we could see shadows moving across the moonlit lawn, multiple figures moving with purpose toward the back of the property. They're not here for the power box, Detective Romano realized, drawing her weapon. They're here for the evidence. Just then, the officers returned from upstairs, their faces grim. The safe is empty. Someone's been in there very recently, and we found this. They held up a small electronic device. Timer-controlled electronic lock override. Professional job. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor's protocol Blackwood wasn't just about destroying evidence. It was about retrieving it first. She had people waiting, watching, ready to move the moment she gave the signal. And we'd been so focused on the documents we'd found that we'd missed the possibility of an active threat. We need to move everything now, I said, already gathering the most crucial evidence. Eleanor's people aren't just here to destroy records. They're here to take back anything that could implicate her larger network. Michael helped me quickly, sort through the papers, stuffing the most important ones into my laptop bag. The garden gate, he whispered. There's movement by the garden gate. Detective Romano was already coordinating with her team through her radio, calling for backup. But we could hear engines starting outside, more vehicles arriving, surrounding the villa. Marco's phone buzzed, a message from his contact at the Naples Police Department. Eleanor's been released, he announced, his voice tight with tension. Some judge signed the order an hour ago. Apparently, there were irregularities with her arrest. Of course there were, I said bitterly. She's activated her network. Every corrupt official, every compromised judge, they're all moving. To protect themselves now. The sound of breaking glass from upstairs made us all jump. They were in the house. The panic room, Michael said suddenly. Mom insisted on having one installed last year. Said it was for security during our vacations. Now we knew why. Eleanor had planned for every contingency, including the need for a secure place to protect or destroy evidence. Where is it? Detective Romano demanded. Behind the wine cellar, but we need the access code. I pulled out Eleanor's phone, which the police had given me to review earlier. Check her notes app. Someone this methodical would keep the code somewhere accessible but not obvious. As Michael scrolled through his mother's phone, I could hear footsteps above us, moving methodically from room to room. Eleanor's people were searching the villa systematically, professionally. These weren't ordinary burglars. They were experienced cleaners, here to erase every trace of evidence we'd gathered. We were running out of time, and somewhere in Naples, Eleanor was already free, probably orchestrating this entire operation. The question was, could we protect the evidence long enough to expose her entire network, Or would Protocol Blackwood succeed in burying the truth forever? "Found it," Michael whispered, his finger hovering over Eleanor's phone. She disguised the panic room code as a wine vintage in her collection notes, 2091, just like Mom to hide something crucial in plain sight. The footsteps above us grew louder, accompanied by the sound of drawers being opened and papers being shuffled. Detective Romano gestured for us to move quickly but quietly toward the wine cellar stairs. I clutched my laptop bag containing the most damning evidence against Eleanor, while Marco carried the USB drive and Eleanor's journal. Each step down into the cellar felt like an eternity, the old wooden stairs threatening to creak under our feet. Just as we reached the wine cellar, a voice called out from above, speaking Italian, but with an American accent. "Better hurry. Up there. Mrs. Blackwood wants everything cleared before the local police arrive with their backup." My legal mind was already racing, documenting details. The accent, the familiar way they referred to Eleanor. These weren't just hired thugs. They were part of her regular operation, probably the same team she used to clear properties after her fraudulent takeovers. Michael led us to what appeared to be a solid stone wall behind a wine rack. "The panel should be here." He pressed a seemingly ordinary piece of stone, revealing a hidden numeric keypad. As he entered the code, we heard breaking glass upstairs, followed by rapid footsteps. Someone had entered through another window. We were running out of time. The wall silently slid open, revealing a small but well-equipped room. Of course, Eleanor would have installed a state-of-the-art panic room. She needed a secure place to handle sensitive documents during her property schemes. "Everyone in," Detective Romano ordered, her weapon trained on the cellar stairs. "Quickly!" But as we rushed inside, Marco suddenly stopped. "Wait, this is too easy." "What do you mean?" I asked, already setting up my laptop on the room's small desk. "Think about it. Eleanor is meticulous, plans for every contingency. Would she really leave the panic room code where we could find it? Unless—" A slow clap echoed from the cellar stairs. "Very good, Mr. Rossi. I was wondering who would figure it out first." Patricia emerged from the shadows, but not the broken Patricia we'd seen being arrested. This was a different woman, confident, composed, dangerous. Behind her, two men in dark suits descended the stairs, their professional demeanor suggesting military or intelligence training. "You didn't really think Eleanor would leave her most sensitive information unprotected, did you?" Patricia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The evidence you've been so carefully gathering? It's all exactly what she wanted you to find." My mind raced back through everything we'd discovered. The tablet, the journal, the USB drive. Each piece of evidence had been almost too perfect, too detailed. A trap, I realized. She left a trail of breadcrumbs, leading us exactly where she wanted us to go. "Smart girl," Patricia nodded. "Eleanor always said you were clever. That's why she had to be extra careful with you. The whole property transfer attempt was just theater, a way to get you to expose yourself." Michael stepped forward, his doctor's composure cracking. "Expose herself? What are you talking about?" Patricia's smile widened. "Your wife has been investigating Eleanor's business dealings for months, hasn't she, Alexandra? Long before this vacation. Working with Marco here, building a case. Did you really think Eleanor wouldn't notice?" I felt Michael's eyes on me, questioning. I'd never told him about my unofficial investigation into his mother's empire. It had started with a simple property fraud case in Boston, but the trail had led straight to Eleanor Blackwood and her web of international real estate schemes. The villa, the vacation, the attempted theft, it was all staged, Marco said quietly. A performance to draw us out. Eleanor needed to know how much you'd discovered, who you were working with, Patricia explained. And now we know. The mighty Alexandra Chen, crusading lawyer, working with Marco Rossi, the infamous fraud investigator. Both of you so convinced you were the hunters, never realizing you were the prey. Detective Romano's grip tightened on her weapon. You're surrounded by police. Backup is already on the way. Patricia laughed. Are you sure about that? Check your radio, detective. Notice how you haven't been able to reach anyone since the power went out? Eleanor's network runs deeper than you can imagine. As if to prove her point, sirens began wailing in the distance, but they were moving away from the villa, not toward it. Eleanor had managed to divert the responding units. Now, Patricia said, all pretense of friendliness gone, hand over everything you've gathered. Your real evidence, not the trail of breadcrumbs Eleanor left for you. All your case, files, your witness lists, your confidential informants, everything. I clutched my laptop bag tighter, mind racing. The panic room behind us might be a trap, but it was also our only advantage. Eleanor's people wanted us cornered, but they also needed us conscious and cooperative to access our files. Michael, I whispered, remember our honeymoon here? The secret passage your mother didn't know about? His eyes widened slightly. The old wine cellar tunnel. We'd discovered it by accident 3 years ago, hidden behind one of the oldest wine racks. Eleanor had renovated the entire villa, but some secrets predated her ownership. Patricia took a step forward. Enough whispered conversations. Make your choice, Alexandra. Hand over your files or things become unpleasant. I met her gaze steadily, buying time as Michael slowly shifted toward the ancient wine rack. You know what's funny, Patricia? Eleanor made the same mistake you all make. She thought she was the only one who could plan ahead. Before Patricia could respond, I threw my laptop bag at the armed men. In the split second of confusion, Michael yanked the hidden lever disguised as an old wine bottle, and the floor beneath us suddenly tilted. The ancient tunnel mechanism worked better than we could have hoped. The tilting floor sent Patricia and her men stumbling backward while we dropped into the hidden passage below. The sound of their surprised shouts was cut off as the trapdoor slammed shut above us. Everyone okay? I called out in the darkness. Marco's phone flashlight clicked on, illuminating Detective Romano helping Michael to his feet. We'd all taken a rough tumble, but we were alive, and more importantly, free. The tunnel leads to the beach, Michael explained, his voice echoing off the stone walls. It was probably used by smugglers centuries ago. I found old manifests hidden in the walls during our honeymoon. Detective Romano checked her weapon. Your mother never discovered this? Eleanor was too focused on modern security systems, I said as we began moving through the tunnel. She never bothered to research the villa's original structure. Another crack in her perfect control. Marco's phone buzzed. Somehow we still had signal this far underground. Message from my contact at Interpol, he said, his face illuminated by the screen. Eleanor's release wasn't just a local judge. Her network activated something called Operation Chrysalis an hour ago. More of her protocol? Michael asked. Bigger, Marco replied grimly. Every corrupt official, every compromised authority, figure in her network. They're all making coordinated moves. Property records are being altered across Europe. Witness statements are disappearing from police files. It's a massive cleanup operation. The implications hit me hard. She's not just covering her tracks. She's erasing her entire criminal empire and rebuilding it under new identities. That's why she needed our evidence, to make sure she caught everything. A distant rumble made us pause. The tunnel walls vibrated slightly, dust falling from above. They're searching for the tunnel entrance, Detective Romano said. We don't have much time. As we hurried through the narrow passage, my mind raced through everything we'd learned. Eleanor's attempted theft of my villa hadn't just been a trap, it had been a smokescreen. While we were focused on gathering evidence about her property, fraud, she was preparing for something much bigger. Wait, I said suddenly, stopping in my tracks. The USB drive from Naples, did anyone actually verify its contents? Marco pulled it from his pocket, connecting it to his phone. His sharp intake of breath confirmed my suspicion. "It's not evidence against her," he said. "It's a list of every property she's targeting next. Dozens of locations, all owned by people investigating her operations, including your apartment in Boston, Alexandra." Michael grabbed the phone, scrolling through the list. "These aren't just properties, they're leverage points. Look, Thomas's resort hosts government conferences. The Henderson estate is used for diplomatic retreats. Every property has a strategic value." "She's not just stealing real estate," Detective Romano realized. "She's building an intelligence network. Each property gives her access to sensitive information, powerful people." Another rumble, closer this time. They were getting near. "We need to contact everyone on that list," I said, already composing a mental strategy. "Warn them. Protect their properties before Eleanor's network can move." "That's assuming we make it out of here," Marco pointed out. "Even if we reach the beach, her people will be waiting. The local police are compromised, and backup is too far away." Michael, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Maybe we don't need to escape. Mom's entire plan relies on erasing her old identity, starting fresh. But what if we could expose her new operation before it begins?" He pointed to something on Marco's phone screen, a pattern in the property list. "These addresses, they're not random. They form a network, connecting through shell companies and holding firms, and they all lead to a central hub," I finished, seeing it too. "A property she's using to coordinate everything. But where?" The answer hit us both at the same time. "The Swiss resort," Michael said. "The one she stole from Thomas. It's not just another theft. It's her new base of operations." Detective Romano checked her ammunition. "That's great, but it doesn't help us right now. We're still trapped underground with her cleanup crew getting closer." I smiled, pulling out my own phone. "Actually, it helps us a lot. Because Eleanor's not the only one who can activate a protocol. While Eleanor had been watching us investigate her property crimes, she'd missed something crucial: my own connections, built over years of fighting fraud. One text message, and every anti-corruption unit, financial crimes task force, and property fraud investigator in my network would know exactly where to look. The tunnel curved, and we could smell salt air. The beach exit was close. But more importantly, I could hear my phone buzzing with responses. Eleanor thought she was erasing her empire and starting fresh, but she'd miscalculated. She'd been so focused on the evidence we had about her past crimes that she'd handed us the blueprint for her future ones. "Your mother made a classic fraudster's mistake," I told Michael as we approached the tunnel's end. "She got so confident in her elaborate schemes that she forgot the simplest rule of criminal investigation." "Which is?" he asked. "Sometimes, the best way to catch someone isn't to prove what they did. It's to catch them in the act of what they're about to do." The sound of waves grew louder as we reached the tunnel's exit. Eleanor's people might be waiting above, but so were a lot of other interested parties. Her perfectly orchestrated Operation Chrysalis was about to have a lot more attention than she planned. As we prepared to emerge onto the beach, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Eleanor had tried to steal my villa, thinking it would silence her biggest threat. Instead, she'd given me exactly what I needed to bring down not just her old empire, but her new one too. The beach was eerily quiet when we emerged from the tunnel, the only sound being waves lapping against the shore. The moon cast long shadows across the sand, and in the distance we could see lights moving along the coastal road, Eleanor's people searching for us. "My contacts are mobilizing," I whispered, checking my phone. "Teams are already moving on the Swiss resort. But we need to survive the next few hours first." As if on cue, a spotlight suddenly illuminated the beach. A voice called out in Italian, then English. "We can see you. Stay where you are." But Detective Romano was already moving, pushing us toward a cluster of fishing boats pulled up on the shore. They're trying to keep us contained until Eleanor's main team arrives, she explained as we crouched behind the wooden hulls. Marco's phone buzzed again. Message from the financial police team at headquarters. They've found something interesting in Eleanor's background. It seems our Mrs. Blackwood isn't who she claims to be. Michael looked up sharply. What do you mean? The real Eleanor Blackwood died 25 years ago in a private hospital in Switzerland. Your mother assumed her identity shortly after. It was her first big fraud, and nobody ever caught it. The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. She's not. She never was. Focus, I said gently, squeezing his hand. We can deal with that later. Right now, we need to... A series of explosions lit up the night sky. The villa, our villa, was burning. Eleanor's people were destroying everything they couldn't take. No, Michael breathed, starting to stand. All those memories, our honeymoon. I pulled him back down as bullets kicked up sand nearby. The villa doesn't matter. Eleanor's trying to erase evidence, but she doesn't realize we've already transmitted everything important. Detective Romano pointed toward a small marina further down the beach. There's a police boat stationed there, if we can reach it. More spotlights swept the beach, and we could hear vehicles approaching on the coastal road above. They were closing in, trying to trap us against the water, but something about their pattern seemed odd to me. They're not trying to catch us, I realized. They're herding us towards something. Marco nodded grimly. Or someone. A sleek yacht appeared around the coastal bend, its running lights off. Even in the darkness, I recognized the distinctive silhouette, Eleanor's private vessel, the one she used for her business trips around the Mediterranean. She's here, Michael said quietly. She wants to handle this personally. The yacht's spotlight snapped on, pinning us in its beam. And there she stood on the upper deck, Eleanor Blackwood, or whoever she really was, looking as immaculate as ever in a designer evening dress. Alexandra, darling! Her voice carried clearly across the water. Why don't you and Michael come aboard? We have so much to discuss. Like how you stole a dead woman's identity, Michael called back, anger overcoming caution. Were you ever going to tell me the truth, Mom? Eleanor's laugh was chilling. Oh, sweetheart, the truth is such a fluid concept in our world. Just ask your wife about her own secrets. Did she tell you she's been investigating me for years? That she deliberately married you to get close to me? I felt Michael stiffen beside me, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed urgently. A message from my Boston office. Blackwood properties worldwide are being transferred en masse. Shell companies dissolving. Something big is happening. You see, Eleanor continued, while we've been having this lovely family drama, my real operation has been proceeding exactly as planned. Everything you think you know, everything you've discovered, it's all just another layer of misdirection. She gestured expansively at the burning villa above. Property fraud? Real estate schemes? That's what you wanted to find, so that's what I let you find. The real game is so much bigger. Marco's phone lit up with alert after alert. She's right. The property transfers, the document trail, it was all calculated. Every investigator, every law enforcement agency has been focused on real estate fraud while something much larger was happening behind the scenes. Did you really think I spent decades building this network just to steal houses? Eleanor's voice dripped with contempt. The properties were just access points, darling. Each one connected to something valuable. Government contracts, classified information, private data. While everyone chased property deeds, my people were gathering something far more precious. Information, I said, the full scope of her operation finally becoming clear. The resort conferences, the diplomatic retreats, the charity galas, every property was chosen for what you could learn from it. Very good. Eleanor clapped her hands in mock approval. I knew you were clever, Alexandra. It's why I had to neutralize you. and now you have a choice to make. The yacht drew closer to shore, and I could see armed figures on the lower deck. Eleanor's security team, professional, deadly, and completely loyal. "Join me," she offered. "Both of you. Michael, darling, you're my son in every way that matters. And Alexandra, you have such potential. Why waste your talents fighting fraud when you could be part of something truly magnificent? A criminal empire built on stolen identities and extorted information." Michael's voice was steady now, his earlier shock replaced by determination. "An empire that's about to become legitimately untouchable," Eleanor corrected. "In 1 hour, Operation Chrysalis completes. Every piece of evidence against me disappears, replaced by ironclad documentation of my new identity. The property fraud investigation becomes a dead end, leading nowhere. And the real prize, 25 years of accumulated secrets and compromising information, makes me more powerful than ever." She spread her arms wide, silhouetted against the burning villa above. "So what's it to be? Join me on the winning side, or stay down there and be eliminated as loose ends? Choose quickly, darling. The cleanup crew is getting impatient." I looked at Michael, seeing my own determination reflected in his eyes. Eleanor thought she had orchestrated everything perfectly, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that love, between mother and son, between husband and wife, was just another tool for manipulation. She was about to learn how wrong she was. "Actually," I said, standing up slowly from behind the fishing boat, "you've got your timing wrong, Eleanor. Operation Chrysalis isn't completing in an hour. It's already failed." Eleanor's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. "You're bluffing." I held up my phone, its screen glowing in the darkness. "While you were busy putting on this impressive show, every major financial crimes unit in Europe was moving on your network. The Swiss resort? Currently being raided by Interpol. Your secure servers? Seized. Your compromised officials? Most of them are already in custody, racing to make deals." "Impossible," Eleanor snapped, but I could see her reaching for her own phone, checking messages with increasingly frantic movements. "You built an impressive system," I continued, moving forward onto the wet sand. "But you made one fundamental mistake. You assumed that because I specialized in property fraud, that's all I was capable of investigating." Michael joined me, his voice carrying clearly across the water. "She's not just a lawyer, Mom. She's been working with international financial crimes task forces for years. The property fraud cases were her cover." Eleanor's mask of control cracked completely as her phone lit up with alert after alert. I could almost see her reading the same messages we'd been receiving. Reports of raids, arrests, seized assets. "This is a minor setback," she declared, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "I have contingencies, fail-safes." "Like Patricia?" Marco called out, emerging from the shadows. "She's already talking to prosecutors. Turns out your loyal friend wasn't so loyal after all. She's been an undercover agent for the past year, helping us map your entire network." This was news even to me. Marco had played things close to the vest, not trusting anyone with the full scope of the investigation. Eleanor's face contorted with rage as she realized how thoroughly she'd been outplayed. "The yacht!" she barked at her security team. "We're leaving. Now!" "I wouldn't," Detective Romano's voice rang out from somewhere to our left. "That vessel is now classified as evidence in an international investigation. Attempting to flee would only add charges." Searchlights suddenly illuminated the water from both directions. Police boats that had been waiting in darkness, timing their approach with our confrontation. Eleanor's yacht was surrounded. "You still don't understand what you're dealing with," Eleanor snarled, her sophisticated facade crumbling completely. "I have information that could bring down governments, destroy lives." "Had information," I corrected. Past tense. "While you were focused on erasing your old identity, we were tracking every server, every backup, every hidden cache of data you'd accumulated. Your leverage is gone, Eleanor. Or should I say, Diana Wells? She recoiled at the sound of her real name, the identity she'd abandoned 25 years ago before stealing Eleanor Blackwood's life. How did you find out? Michael finished for her. There was one person who knew the truth, the real Eleanor Blackwood's nurse at that Swiss hospital. The one person whose silence you couldn't buy because she was in a coma. She woke up 3 months ago. Eleanor, Diana, gripped the yacht's railing, her knuckles white. Everything I did for power, for control. You could never understand. I understand perfectly, I said. You grew up powerless, watching the wealthy elite control everything. So you decided to become one of them, stealing an identity, building a network of corruption and blackmail. Every property you stole wasn't just about money, it was about gaining leverage over powerful people. The police boats were closing in now, their lights revealing more details of Eleanor's face. Without her usual perfect makeup and controlled expression, she looked older, harder, more like the ruthless criminal she truly was. Michael, she tried one last time, you're my son. I raised you, loved you. You used me. Michael cut her off. Every moment of love was calculated, every show of affection part of your cover. A real mother doesn't try to destroy her son's marriage, doesn't try to steal his wife's property, doesn't build an empire on lies and blackmail. Armed officers were boarding the yacht now, moving with professional efficiency to secure Eleanor's security team. She made no move to resist, her attention fixed on us standing on the beach. You know what your real mistake was? I called up to her. Not the fraud, not the stolen identity, not even the blackmail. It was thinking that love and loyalty were weaknesses to be exploited. You never understood that real relationships, the kind built on trust and truth, are stronger than any network of lies. As the officers approached her, Eleanor straightened, her designer dress trying to reclaim some dignity. You think this is over? There will always be powerful people who need their secrets kept. Someone else will take my place. Maybe, Detective Romano acknowledged, climbing onto the yacht. But they won't be you. Diana Wells, you're under arrest for identity theft, fraud, extortion, money laundering, and conspiracy charges in multiple jurisdictions. The villa fire was dying down now, its glow replaced by the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. As Eleanor was led away in handcuffs, Michael took my hand, squeezing it gently. I'm sorry, he said quietly. About the villa, about not seeing who she really was all these years. I squeezed back. The villa was just a building. What matters is that we stopped her from hurting more people, and we did it together. Marco approached us, holding his phone. You'll want to see this. Thomas just sent a message. They found something interesting in the Swiss resort's hidden safe room. Documentation of Eleanor's, Diana's, entire journey. Every identity she stole, every life she destroyed while building her empire. It's all there. I looked up at the smoldering villa, then out at the yacht where Eleanor's criminal empire had finally crumbled. Send it all to the prosecutors. Every victim deserves to know the truth. And Diana Wells deserves to face justice as herself, not hiding behind a stolen name. The sun was beginning to rise over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was a new day, and for the first time in 25 years, the woman who had called herself Eleanor Blackwood would face it as who she really was. Just another criminal whose elaborate schemes had finally caught up with her. The morning after Eleanor's arrest brought a flurry of activity to what remained of Villa Rosa. International investigators swarmed the property, documenting everything from the sophisticated security systems she had installed to the hidden compartments we hadn't even known existed. The fire had been contained to the upper floor, leaving most of the villa's structure intact, along with the evidence Eleanor had tried to destroy. "You need to see this," Marco called from Eleanor's study, where technicians were examining a false bottom in her antique desk. "We found her original documentation, the real Eleanor Blackwood's papers from 25 years ago." The yellowed documents told a chilling story. The real Eleanor Blackwood had been a wealthy American socialite seeking treatment at an exclusive Swiss clinic. Diana Wells, then working as an administrative assistant at the facility, had meticulously planned her identity theft over several months. She had studied Eleanor's mannerisms, collected her documents, and even practiced her signature. When the real Eleanor died during a routine procedure, Diana was ready. "Look at the attention to detail," Detective Romano remarked, examining the forged death certificate Diana had created for herself. She even arranged for Diana Wells to be cremated, using the body of a homeless woman from Zurich. No one could prove she wasn't dead because there was no body to exhume. Michael stood in the doorway, his surgeon's hands clenched into fists. "She planned everything. Even meeting my father wasn't an accident, was it?" I reviewed more documents from the hidden compartment. "No, it wasn't. The real Eleanor Blackwood had been briefly engaged to your father in college. Diana chose him. Specifically, someone who had known Eleanor but not well enough to spot subtle differences in personality." The investigation team had set up a command center in the villa's dining room. Computers hummed as analysts processed the mountain of digital evidence seized from Eleanor's servers. The scope of her operation was staggering. Each property she had stolen was connected to a larger scheme of information gathering and blackmail. "The Swiss resort was just the tip of the iceberg," Marco explained, pulling up financial records. She used each property as a staging ground for surveillance. The Henderson estate hosted diplomatic retreats. She had the entire place wired for sound. Thomas's resort contained a sophisticated data interception system disguised as normal Wi-Fi equipment. A junior investigator rushed in with a laptop. "Sir, we've found something in the yacht's navigation system. Regular trips to a small island off the Corsican coast. Satellite imagery shows a substantial compound." "Another safe house?" Detective Romano asked. "More likely her backup headquarters," I suggested. "Somewhere outside normal jurisdiction where she could store sensitive information. We should coordinate with French authorities." "Already done," Marco interrupted, checking his phone. "French special forces are securing the location now. Early reports indicate an extensive archive, physical documents, servers, even old recording equipment." Michael picked up a framed photo from Eleanor's desk, his medical school graduation. Everything was a lie. Every proud smile, every word of encouragement. She was just playing a role. I placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Not everything. The pride in your accomplishments, the love she showed you. Some of that had to be real. Even someone as calculating as Diana couldn't fake every emotion for 25 years. "Actually," a new voice interjected, "she could." We turned to find Patricia in the doorway, flanked by 2 agents. She had agreed to provide a full statement about her undercover work infiltrating Eleanor's organization. "Diana Wells was a master of emotional manipulation," Patricia continued. "It wasn't just about forging documents or stealing properties. She became Eleanor Blackwood so completely that sometimes I think she forgot her original identity. Every relationship was carefully crafted to serve her purposes." The technicians had managed to access Eleanor's private email server, messages, flooded the screens, correspondence with corrupt officials, instructions to her network of fraudsters, detailed profiles of potential targets. 2 decades of criminal enterprise meticulously documented. She kept everything, Detective Romano marveled. Every scheme, every manipulation, all carefully filed and categorized. Because information was her real currency, I realized. The properties, the money, those were just means to an end. What she really collected was secrets. each document, each recording gave her power over someone. Michael had moved to the window, staring out at the Mediterranean. The yacht where we had confronted Eleanor still floated in the bay, now swarming with forensics teams. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now we follow every lead," Marco replied. "We identify every victim, track down every stolen property, uncover every secret she used for blackmail. It will take months, maybe years to unravel everything." My phone buzzed with a message from my Boston office. More victims were coming forward, encouraged by news of Eleanor's arrest. People who had lost homes, businesses, life savings to her schemes. Each had a story of manipulation and betrayal. "We'll need to set up a task force," Detective Romano said. "International cooperation, multiple jurisdictions. This goes beyond simple property fraud now." I looked around the study, taking in the evidence of Eleanor's decades-long deception. The forged documents that had stolen one woman's identity, the surveillance equipment that had stolen countless secrets, the carefully maintained facade that had stolen my husband's truth about his own mother. "Diana Wells spent 25 years building this empire of lies," I said. "Now we're going to spend however long it takes to dismantle it, piece by piece, and make sure every victim finds justice." As the morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the swirl of dust motes from disturbed files and open drawers, I could feel the weight of the task ahead. Eleanor's arrest wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a much larger investigation. One that would uncover decades of crime, heal countless victims, and finally reveal the full truth about the woman who had stolen not just properties, but entire lives. The Rome prosecutor's office buzzed with activity as investigators from multiple countries coordinated their efforts. 1 week after Eleanor's arrest, I stood before a wall of monitors displaying property records, financial transactions, and surveillance data from across Europe and North America. Each screen told part of a story that was growing more complex. By the hour, 3 government ministers have resigned in the past 24 hours, Marco announced, entering the conference room with fresh reports. 2 in France, 1 in Belgium. All had connections to properties in Eleanor's network. They're claiming they were blackmailed with information she gathered during private meetings at her various estates. Detective Romano, now heading the International Task Force, pulled up a map showing Eleanor's property holdings in red dots. The display looked like a constellation spreading across the continents. Each location was chosen for its strategic value. The Vienna apartment overlooked diplomatic residences. The Paris townhouse was next door to a private club frequented by banking executives. The London property had direct sight lines into a government minister's office. "She didn't just steal properties," I said, studying the pattern. "She created a surveillance network disguised as a real estate empire. Every location gave her access to sensitive information she could leverage." Michael entered with Thomas, who had flown in from Singapore to assist with the investigation. His resort's records had proven crucial in understanding Eleanor's operation. "The Swiss authorities just finished their preliminary analysis of the resort security system," Thomas reported. "It wasn't just basic surveillance. She had cutting-edge equipment hidden throughout the building, some of it military-grade." "The question is, where did she get that kind of technology?" Detective Romano mused. "Even with her resources, this level of sophistication suggests state-level involvement." As if in answer, my phone buzzed with a message from the Boston DA's office. "They found something in Eleanor's private records," I announced, reading the update. Regular payments from numbered accounts traced back to several intelligence agencies. She wasn't just gathering information for personal gain, she was selling it to the highest bidders. The implications were staggering. Eleanor, Diana Wells, hadn't just built a criminal enterprise. She had created a private intelligence network that rivaled government agencies. Her property schemes had given her access to countless sensitive conversations, documents, and meetings, which she then monetized to the highest bidders. Latest from Interpol, Marco said, checking his tablet. They've identified 3 more properties connected to high-level political gatherings. A villa in Greece that hosted informal EU negotiations, a chateau in France used for private diplomatic meetings, and a penthouse in Geneva overlooking 3 major banks' headquarters. Michael studied the financial records scrolling across one screen. Look at the timing of these transactions. Every major property acquisition coincided with significant political or economic events. She wasn't opportunistic. She was strategic. The properties were just the foundation, I realized. She used them to build relationships, gather intelligence, and create a web of influence. The real estate fraud was elaborate enough to keep law enforcement focused on financial crimes, while her surveillance operation grew underneath. Detective Romano pulled up Eleanor's calendar from the past year. Every social event, every charity gala, every private party, they all connected to someone with access to valuable information. She didn't just steal properties, she stole secrets that could influence global events. A commotion outside drew our attention. A group of senior officials had arrived, their serious expressions suggesting major developments. The task force, Chief entered, looking grave. We've confirmed Diana Wells's original connection to intelligence services, he announced. Before stealing Eleanor Blackwood's identity, she worked as a low-level analyst for multiple agencies. She used that experience to build her surveillance network, knowing exactly what kind of information would be valuable. The revelation added another layer to her decades-long deception. She hadn't just chosen Eleanor Blackwood's identity by chance. She had selected it as part of a calculated plan to position herself in wealthy, influential circles where she could gather intelligence. The Swiss compound raid has yielded more evidence, the chief continued. Decades of recorded conversations, photographed documents, and compiled dossiers on hundreds of influential figures. She wasn't just blackmailing them, she was tracking their movements, relationships, and activities systematically. Thomas pulled up footage from his resort's hidden security system. Look at the camera placements. Every meeting room, every private dining area, every spa facility, all designed to capture conversations and document interactions. The guests never suspected they were under surveillance. And now all that intelligence is in the hands of law enforcement, Marco noted. Her entire network of influence is unraveling. The question is, how many more governments and institutions will be affected? For sure. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing with updates from various agencies. Each hour brought new revelations, new resignations, new investigations sparked by Eleanor's seized records. The woman who had tried to steal my villa had inadvertently exposed decades of corruption across multiple continents. We need to move carefully, Detective Romano cautioned. Some of this information could destabilize governments if released improperly. We're not just dealing with property fraud anymore. This is a matter of international security. Michael stood by the window watching the Roman sunset. She built all this, maintained this incredible web of deception, while playing the role of loving mother and successful businesswoman. How did none of us see it? Because she showed us exactly what we expected to see, I replied. A wealthy socialite with a talent for real estate, the perfect cover for something much more sophisticated. As night fell over Rome, the investigation continued. Eleanor's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was exposing the hidden connections and corrupt dealings of powerful people across the globe. The woman who had lived as Eleanor Blackwood for 25 years had created more than a criminal enterprise. She had built a shadow network that had influenced world events from behind the scenes of her stolen properties. And now, piece by piece, that network was being exposed to the light. The interrogation room in Rome's judicial police headquarters felt unnaturally bright under fluorescent lights. Diana Wells, formerly known as Eleanor Blackwood, sat across the table, her designer prison uniform a stark contrast to her usual elegant attire. After 2 weeks in custody, her carefully maintained facade had begun to crack, revealing glimpses of the person beneath the stolen identity. "I was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa," she began, her voice carrying none of Eleanor's cultured accent. "My father worked at a meatpacking plant. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families." She paused, a bitter smile playing across her lips. "I spent my childhood watching how the other half lived, learning their mannerisms, their expectations, their weaknesses." Detective Romano and I exchanged glances. After days of silence, Diana had finally agreed to talk, but only to me. Perhaps she felt a connection to the daughter-in-law she had tried to destroy, or perhaps she simply wanted to finally tell her story to someone who had seen through her deception. "The real Eleanor Blackwood," Diana continued, "was everything I wanted to be. Rich, respected, born into privilege. When she checked into that Swiss clinic, I had already been studying her for months. Did you know she never locked her filing cabinet? Never worried about leaving personal documents lying around. The wealthy never think about security. They assume their money protects them." I activated the recording device on the table. "Tell me about the clinic." Diana's eyes took on a distant look. "I was good at my job there. Administrative assistant to the medical director. I had access to everything: patient records, treatment plans, private correspondence. I saw how the wealthy handled their secrets, their addictions, their failures. That's when I realized that information was the real currency of power." New documents had arrived that morning from American investigators who had traced Diana Wells's past. School records showed a brilliant but troubled student. Employment history revealed a pattern of jobs that gave her access to privileged information: law firms, private banks, exclusive medical facilities. "But why Eleanor Blackwood specifically?" I pressed. "There were other wealthy patients at the clinic." "Because she was perfect," Diana replied, leaning forward. "No close family, extensive international connections, and a planned extended stay in Switzerland for exhaustion treatment. When she died during a routine procedure, it wasn't just opportunity, it was destiny." The investigation had uncovered Diana's meticulous preparation. She had spent months collecting Eleanor's handwriting samples, studying her medical history, even practicing her signature. The real Eleanor's death had been officially recorded as due to complications from anesthesia, but new evidence suggested Diana might have played a more active role. "What about Michael's father?" I asked. "Was that relationship part of your plan from the beginning?" Something flickered in Diana's eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd seen. "Charles?" Charles was unexpected. The real Eleanor had known him in college, yes, but I didn't plan to pursue that connection. He was kind, successful, respected in his field. When he fell in love with me, with Eleanor, it provided the perfect foundation for my new life. Medical records from the Swiss clinic had revealed more about the real Eleanor Blackwood. She had been seeking treatment for depression following her mother's death, planning to stay in Switzerland indefinitely. Diana had used that planned absence to slowly transition into Eleanor's life, making subtle changes that friends and acquaintances attributed to grief and therapy. But it wasn't enough, was it? I observed. Being Eleanor Blackwood, having wealth and status, you needed more. Diana's laugh was harsh. More. I needed everything. Every secret, every piece of leverage, every advantage. You've seen my network, my properties, my surveillance operations. I built something extraordinary, something far beyond what the real Eleanor Blackwood could have ever achieved. The door opened, and Michael entered quietly, standing in the corner. Diana's composure cracked slightly at the sight of her son, the one person who might have been more than just part of her elaborate scheme. "He wasn't supposed to find out," she whispered, more to herself than to us. "None of this was supposed to come to light." Operation Chrysalis was meant to be my masterpiece, a complete transformation into someone new, someone even more powerful. Recent analysis of Diana's records had revealed the full scope of Operation Chrysalis. It wasn't just about erasing her criminal past. It was meant to establish her as a legitimate power broker, using decades of gathered intelligence to secure her position in global affairs. "Did you ever feel guilty?" Michael asked suddenly, his first words to his mother since her arrest. "About living another woman's life? About building everything on lies?" Diana turned to him, and for a moment, her mask slipped completely. "Guilty? I gave you everything. Education, opportunities, connections, everything I never had. The real Eleanor Blackwood would have remained a depressed socialite, contributing nothing to the world. I took her identity and built an empire. An empire of stolen properties and blackmail," I reminded her. "Built on the suffering of countless victims." "Victims?" Diana scoffed. "I took from people who had more than they deserved, who never appreciated what they had. Every property I acquired served a greater purpose, gathering intelligence, building influence, creating a network that governments themselves couldn't match." The interrogation continued for hours as Diana revealed more about her transformation from a working-class girl in Iowa to an international criminal mastermind. Each revelation added new layers to our understanding of her decades-long deception. As night fell over Rome, Diana was led back to her cell, leaving Michael and me with the weight of her confessions. The woman who had raised him, who had tried to steal my property, who had built an empire on stolen identities and secrets, was neither Eleanor Blackwood nor Diana Wells. She was something else entirely, a chameleon who had spent so long wearing masks that her true self had become lost in the deception. "She still hasn't told us everything," Detective Romano noted, reviewing the interview recordings. "There are gaps in her story, pieces missing from the puzzle." Because the full truth would implicate even more powerful people, I realized. Even now, she's protecting certain secrets, keeping them as insurance for whatever she's planning next. Michael stood at the window, watching Diana being escorted across the courtyard below. "She told me once that identity was fluid, that people could become whoever they wanted to be. I thought she was giving me life advice. Now I realize she was justifying her entire existence." The investigation would continue, unraveling more layers of Diana's deception. But one truth had become clear. The woman who had lived as Eleanor Blackwood had never really existed at all. She was a creation, a carefully constructed facade, hiding a master manipulator who had spent decades building power through secrets and lies. And somewhere in her web of deception, even Diana Wells had lost track of who she really was. The grand conference room at Rome's finest hotel had been transformed into a command center for Diana Wells's victims. 3 weeks after her arrest, people from across Europe and America had gathered to share their stories and assist the investigation. The room buzzed with multiple languages as victims compared experiences and provided evidence. Susan, Richard's widow, stood at the podium, addressing the assembled group. For years, I thought I was going crazy. Diana, Eleanor, as we knew, her then, was so convincing when she explained how my husband had sold our Tuscan villa before his death. She even produced documents with his signature, showed me bank transfers that looked legitimate. When I questioned things, she would remind everyone about my grief, suggest that perhaps my memory wasn't reliable. Thomas, still processing the theft of his Swiss resort, spoke next. She used our trust against us. Every time I called to check on the resort's management, she had perfect explanations for everything. The financial reports were immaculate. She even sent videos of satisfied guests, corporate events running smoothly. Now we know those videos were carefully staged, hiding the surveillance equipment and data-gathering operations. The Henderson family had brought their security footage, now being analyzed for evidence of Diana's other operations. She targeted properties with strategic value, Mrs. Henderson explained, pointing to a map of Diana's acquisitions. Our estate didn't just host diplomatic retreats, it was positioned perfectly to monitor 3 different government communications facilities. She chose every property for its intelligence-gathering potential. Detective Romano moved through the crowd, collecting statements and documenting evidence. The victims' testimonies were creating a comprehensive picture of Diana's methodology. She had adapted her approach for each target, crafting personalized schemes that exploited their specific vulnerabilities. The pattern becomes clear when you see all the cases together, I addressed the group. She would identify properties with strategic value, then research the owners extensively. Personal problems, financial difficulties, family conflicts. She found leverage points and exploited them masterfully. The property transfers were just the beginning. Once she had control of a location, she turned it into a surveillance hub. Michael sat quietly in the corner, listening to victim after victim describe how his mother had systematically destroyed lives and stolen properties. His medical training helped him maintain composure, but I could see the toll each revelation took on him. A new arrival drew everyone's attention. James Blackwood, Charles's younger brother, had finally come forward with information about Diana's early days as Eleanor. I always knew something was off, he admitted to the group. The Eleanor I knew in college was different, more reserved, less calculating. But Diana played the role so perfectly that I convinced myself I was remembering wrong. The investigation had discovered that Diana had spent months studying films and photographs of the real Eleanor Blackwood before assuming her identity. She had practiced her mannerisms, learned her history, and even undergone subtle cosmetic procedures to perfect the impersonation. What's remarkable, Marco noted, reviewing the testimony transcripts, is how she maintained different versions of Eleanor for different audiences. To social circles, she was the perfect socialite. To business contacts, she was the shrewd real estate mogul. To family, she was the caring matriarch. Each role carefully crafted and maintained for decades. As the day progressed, more victims arrived, each with their own story of manipulation and loss. A French vineyard owner described how Diana had exploited his wife's illness to gain control of their property. An Italian countess revealed how her chateau had been stolen during a moment of financial crisis. Each property, we now knew, had been chosen for its strategic location or access to valuable information. Patricia, still working with investigators, provided context for the victims' stories. Diana kept detailed psychological profiles of potential targets. She would spend months, sometimes years, laying groundwork before making her move. The property transfers were always timed to moments of maximum vulnerability. The victims began organizing themselves into working groups, sharing resources and information. What Diana hadn't anticipated was how her victims would unite, their combined experiences and evidence creating an unshakable case against her. She thought isolation was her weapon, Susan observed, watching the collaboration unfold. She kept us apart, made each of us feel like we were alone in our suspicions. But now, together, we're stronger than her network ever was. A team of international prosecutors had arrived to coordinate the legal response. Diana's crimes crossed multiple jurisdictions, requiring unprecedented cooperation between law enforcement agencies. The victims' united testimony would be crucial in ensuring justice was served. This isn't just about recovering stolen properties, I reminded the group. Diana's surveillance operations compromised sensitive information affecting governments and institutions worldwide. Your testimonies help expose the full scope of her activities. As evening approached, the victims gathered for a shared meal, a symbol of unity replacing the isolation Diana had forced upon them. Michael, who had remained quiet throughout the day, finally stood to address the group. I know my mother, Diana, hurt each of you deeply, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. As her son, I feel a responsibility to help make things right. Your courage in coming forward, in sharing your stories, is helping dismantle decades of deception. Together, we can ensure she never hurts anyone else. The room filled with supportive murmurs. These people, brought together by shared trauma, were transforming their pain into purpose. Diana had built her empire on dividing people, exploiting their weaknesses. Now, united, her victims were becoming her most powerful adversaries. As the victims continued sharing their stories late into the night, a new kind of network was forming, one built on truth rather than deception, on justice rather than exploitation. Diana's web of lies was unraveling, replaced by a community of survivors determined to reclaim not just their stolen properties, but their dignity and peace of mind. The evening air was cool on the balcony of our temporary Rome apartment, where Michael stood looking out over the ancient city. 1 month had passed since his mother's arrest, and the weight of truth still hung heavy on his shoulders. I watched him from the doorway, remembering the confident surgeon who had arrived in Italy for a family vacation, never suspecting how completely his world would shatter. "I found something today," he said without turning around. While going through the evidence files, a photograph from my medical school graduation. He held up a worn picture, Diana beaming proudly beside him in his cap and gown. I always thought this moment was real, that this was the one time she let her guard down and showed genuine pride. Now I wonder if she was just calculating how my medical career could benefit her network. I joined him at the railing, our shoulders touching. "The investigators found her diary entries from that day," I said gently. "She wrote about feeling actual pride, about how your achievement was something she hadn't orchestrated or manipulated. It might have been one of the few genuine moments in her performance." Michael's hands tightened on the railing. "How do you separate the real moments from the fake ones?" 25 years of memories, and I can't trust any of them. Was anything she ever did or said genuine? The investigation had revealed the extent of Diana's manipulation of Michael's life. She had influenced his choice of medical school, steered him towards certain specialties, even orchestrated chance meetings with influential patients who later became part of her network. "I spoke with Dr. Brenner today," Michael continued, referring to his longtime mentor. "Turns out my appointment to the hospital board wasn't based on merit alone. Mother had been cultivating relationships there for years, positioning me where she wanted me. Even my success isn't fully my own." I turned him to face me. "Your surgical skills, your dedication to patients, your integrity, those are all yours. Diana may have opened some doors, but you walked through them on your own merit. The lives you've saved, the differences you've made, those are real." Inside our apartment, files were spread across the dining table, evidence we were reviewing for the prosecution. Each document revealed new layers of Diana's deception, but also highlighted the strength of what Michael had built despite her manipulation. "You know what hurts the most?" he said, picking up another photograph, a family Christmas celebration from years ago. "I keep thinking about Dad. He died never knowing the truth about her. His entire marriage was based on a lie. The woman he loved never actually existed." Recent discoveries had shown that Charles Blackwood might have begun to suspect something near the end of his life. Investigators had found draft letters in his personal effects, never sent, expressing concerns about Eleanor's behavior. But he had died before connecting the dots that would have exposed her true identity. "The real Eleanor Blackwood," Michael mused, "the woman Dad was originally engaged to in college. She might have given him a genuine life, a real marriage. Instead, he got Diana's perfect performance of love." I made us both tea, an evening ritual we'd developed since the investigation began. "Your father found real love in his life, with you. Diana's feelings might have been calculated, but his love for his son was genuine. That's something she couldn't fake or manipulate. Michael sipped his tea, considering this. When did you first suspect something wasn't right with her? Before all this happened? There were small signs, I admitted. Inconsistencies in her stories about the past, the way she handled certain business dealings. But I never imagined the full scope until I started investigating property fraud cases and kept finding connections to her operations. We had decided to be completely honest with each other, sharing everything we discovered about Diana's deceptions. It was painful, but necessary for healing. Each revelation brought its own kind of clarity. You know what's strange? Michael said, a hint of his old humor returning. All those times she tried to come between us, to undermine our marriage, she actually made us stronger. Every scheme she planned brought us closer together. It was true. Diana's attempts to manipulate. Our relationship had forced us to build stronger communication, deeper trust. Her final attempt to steal our villa had backfired spectacularly, transforming us from targets into the architects of her downfall. I've been thinking about the future, Michael continued, about the kind of legacy I want to build. Diana spent her life creating elaborate lies, hurting people for power. I want to use whatever influence I have to help heal people instead. He showed me plans he'd been working on, a foundation to help victims of property fraud recover and rebuild their lives. The idea was to use his medical connections and my legal expertise to provide comprehensive support to people like those his mother had victimized. It won't make up for what she did, he acknowledged. But maybe we can transform her network of deception into something positive. Use the same connections and resources to help people instead of exploiting them. I looked at my husband, not Diana Wells's son in that moment, but his own man, finding strength in the rubble of shattered illusions. That's what really separates you from her, I said. She saw people as tools to be used. You see them as lives to be helped. The night deepened around us, the lights of Rome twinkling like stars fallen to earth. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more evidence to process, more truths to face. But tonight, we had each other, and the beginning of a new path forward. Michael wrapped his arm around me, and together we watched the eternal city sleep. Diana had spent decades building an empire of lies, but in its collapse, we were constructing something stronger, a foundation of truth, trust, and genuine purpose. It wasn't the legacy she had planned, but it was one that might finally bring healing to all the lives she had touched. The Rome International Criminal Court buzzed with anticipation on the first day of Diana Wells's preliminary hearing. Security was unprecedented, with armed guards positioned throughout the building. The case had drawn international attention, not just for its scope, but for the potential implications of Diana's intelligence-gathering operations. I sat in the front row of the gallery beside Michael, watching as Diana was led into the courtroom. She had traded her designer wardrobe for a conservative gray suit, but her posture remained regal, almost defiant. Her eyes swept the courtroom, calculating as ever, before settling on Michael with an expression I couldn't quite read. The lead prosecutor, Helena Rossi, no relation to Marco, opened with a statement that silenced the packed courtroom. What we present today is not simply a case of property fraud or identity theft. Before us sits a woman who orchestrated one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in modern history. Diana Wells didn't just steal homes, she stole lives, secrets, and power itself. The evidence presentation began with the original identity theft. Hospital records from the Swiss clinic appeared on screens throughout the courtroom, showing the real Eleanor Blackwood's final days. The prosecution had traced Diana's careful preparation, including her manipulation of medical records to ensure no autopsy would be performed. The defendant didn't choose Eleanor Blackwood at random, Helena continued. She selected her victim carefully, knowing that Eleanor's wealthy background and international connections would provide the perfect cover for her true activities. The property acquisitions that followed were not merely theft. They were strategic, moves to build a surveillance network that compromised governments across 3 continents. Diana's defense team, led by renowned international lawyer James Morton, argued that her actions were technically legal through various corporate structures and power of attorney agreements. But as the prosecution presented victim after victim, the pattern of manipulation became undeniable. Susan took the stand first, her voice steady as she described how Diana had exploited her grief over Richard's death. She offered to help manage our properties while I was mourning. By the time I realized what was happening, she had transferred everything into her name through a maze of shell companies. The Henderson family testified about the sophisticated surveillance equipment found in their estate, revealing how Diana had recorded countless private diplomatic conversations. Technical experts explained how she had created a network of listening posts disguised as luxury properties, gathering intelligence that she sold to the highest bidders. During a brief recess, Michael gripped my hand tightly. "She hasn't shown any reaction," he whispered. "Not to the evidence, not to the testimonies. It's like she's watching a mildly interesting play." Indeed, Diana sat calmly through each revelation, occasionally whispering to her lawyers but showing no sign of distress or remorse. Her composure cracked only once, when Thomas testified about discovering that his resort had been used to gather compromising information on government officials. "The defendant didn't just betray family," Helena emphasized, displaying financial records on the courtroom screens. "She created an intelligence-gathering operation that rivaled government agencies. Every property she acquired served a dual purpose, providing legitimate income while facilitating espionage." The defense attempted to paint Diana as a skilled businesswoman who had merely taken advantage of legal loopholes. But their arguments faltered when the prosecution presented her detailed notebooks, documenting decades of calculated manipulation and exploitation. "Within these pages," Helena declared, holding up one of Diana's journals, "we find the true Diana Wells. Not the society matron she pretended to be, but a master manipulator who viewed every relationship as a potential asset to be exploited." The most damaging testimony came from Patricia, who detailed how Diana had systematically gathered compromising information on powerful figures. She kept files on everyone: politicians, business leaders, judges. The properties weren't just investments. They were weapons in her arsenal of influence. During another break, Detective Romano shared updates from ongoing investigations. "We're still discovering new properties, new victims. Her network was more extensive than we initially believed. Some of the intelligence she gathered could affect international relations for years to come." Diana finally showed emotion when the prosecution presented evidence about her original identity theft. Records from her early life in Iowa revealed a pattern of small-scale fraud and identity theft, suggesting that assuming Eleanor Blackwood's identity wasn't her first crime, just her most ambitious. "The defendant before you," Helena told, "the judges, has spent more than half her life living as someone else. Every relationship she formed, every deal she made, every property she acquired, was part of an elaborate deception. The question before this court isn't just about property, theft, or fraud. It's about holding accountable someone who built an empire on stolen lives and compromised secrets." As the day's proceedings drew to a close, I watched Diana being led away. She turned briefly, catching Michael's eye, and for a moment her mask slipped. Something like regret flickered across her face before the practiced composure returned. "The prosecution has only scratched the surface," Marco commented as we left the courthouse. "There are still sealed documents relating to national security, evidence that can't be presented in open court. The full scope of her activities might never be made public." The sunset painted Rome's skyline in shades of gold and purple as we drove back to our apartment. The first day of hearings had laid the groundwork for what promised to be one of the most complex international criminal cases in recent history. Diana Wells hadn't just committed crimes. She had created a shadow world of power and influence that was only now beginning to be exposed. The real question wasn't whether she would be convicted, but how many other powerful figures would fall as her empire of secrets continued to unravel. 2 months into Diana's trial, the dominoes began falling across continents. I stood in Interpol's European headquarters in Lyon, watching multiple screens track the dismantling of her network in real time. Red dots representing her properties. And operations blinked out one by one as law enforcement agencies moved simultaneously across multiple countries. 6 government ministers in 3 countries have resigned this morning, Detective Romano reported, highlighting locations on the central map. Diana's files contained evidence of corruption that went far beyond property fraud. Her surveillance operations recorded years of illegal dealings. Marco entered with fresh intelligence reports. The Swiss banking connection just broke open. 3 major banks are under investigation for helping Diana hide stolen assets and launder money from her intelligence selling operations. Their entire boards of directors are being questioned. The scale of Diana's influence became clearer with each passing hour. Her network hadn't just gathered information, it had shaped political decisions, influenced financial markets, and manipulated international relations. The properties she had stolen were merely the foundation for something far more insidious. "Latest from London," I announced, reading from my secure tablet. Scotland Yard just raided offices connected to Diana's UK operations. They found evidence linking her to dozens of unsolved identity theft cases. She wasn't just stealing properties, she was collecting identities, creating a library of potential new lives for herself and her associates. The investigation had revealed that Operation Chrysalis wasn't just about Diana assuming a new identity. She had been preparing multiple false identities for key members of her network, planning to orchestrate a mass disappearance that would have allowed her entire operation to vanish and resurface under new names. Michael arrived from the courthouse, where Diana's trial continued. "She's still showing no reaction to any of it," he reported, watching the screens track the collapse of his mother's empire. Even as her network crumbles, she sits there like she's watching a mildly interesting play. The prosecutors think she has another contingency plan we haven't discovered yet. The evidence supported that theory. Diana's organization was too sophisticated, too carefully planned, to not have multiple backup strategies. Even as we dismantled her known operations, investigators worried about hidden assets and sleeper agents we hadn't yet identified. "Look, at this pattern," Detective Romano pointed to a cluster of properties in northern Italy. "These acquisitions form a perfect surveillance triangle around several major telecommunications hubs. She wasn't just recording conversations, she was intercepting digital communications on a massive scale." Technical experts had discovered that Diana's properties often housed sophisticated signal interception equipment, disguised as normal, building infrastructure. She had created a private intelligence network that rivaled government capabilities, all hidden behind the facade of luxury real estate. "The prosecutors have a new theory," Marco shared, pulling up financial records. "They believe Diana was working towards something bigger than just gathering intelligence. These transactions suggest she was positioning herself to influence global events directly. The properties, the surveillance, the blackmail material. It was all building towards some larger operation. A commotion at one of the monitoring stations drew our attention. An analyst had discovered a pattern in Diana's recent communications from prison. She's been sending coded messages through her legal team," the analyst explained. "We've cracked part of it. She's been activating sleeper agents, people we didn't know were part of her network." Within hours, arrests began across Europe and America. Bank executives, government officials, law enforcement officers, people who had seemed untouched by Diana's crimes were revealed as long-term assets in her organization. Each arrest led to new revelations about the depth of her influence. "The scale of this is unprecedented," Detective Romano marveled. "She didn't just build a criminal enterprise. She created a shadow government. Every major institution has been compromised to some degree by her operations. Michael studied the screens, watching his mother's life work dissolve in real time. All those charity galas, all those social events she hosted, they weren't just for show. She was gathering people, collecting their secrets, building a web of influence that spanned decades. The day brought more resignations, more arrests, more revelations. Diana's network had infiltrated law firms, hospitals, government agencies, anywhere that valuable information could be gathered and leveraged. Each new discovery revealed another layer of her methodical accumulation of power. "We found something in the London raids," an analyst called out. Documents suggesting Diana was planning to influence upcoming elections in multiple countries. She wasn't just gathering intelligence anymore. She was preparing to shape global politics directly. As night fell over Lyon, the screens continued, tracking the collapse of Diana's empire. But even as we celebrated each successful operation, a nagging worry persisted. Diana's calm demeanor during her trial, her seemingly acceptance of her network's destruction, it all suggested she had yet another layer of plans we hadn't discovered. She's playing a longer game, I realized, watching the patterns of collapse. This network we're dismantling, what if it's just another smokescreen? What if the real operation is something we haven't even detected yet? Michael nodded grimly. Mom always said that the best deceptions are the ones where people think they've discovered the truth. What if taking down this network is exactly what she wanted us to do? The questions hung in the air as we continued monitoring the worldwide operations. Diana Wells had spent decades building an empire of secrets and lies. As we dismantled it piece by piece, we couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, somehow, she was still several moves ahead. 3 months after Diana's arrest, I stood in the marble-floored entry of Thomas's Swiss resort, watching as he officially reclaimed his property. The process of returning Diana's stolen properties to their rightful owners had begun, but it was proving far more complex than anyone had anticipated. "We've had to sweep every room for surveillance equipment," Thomas explained, leading us through the elegant corridors. The technical team found cameras and listening devices built directly into the walls. Some of the architectural features were specifically designed to facilitate monitoring guests. It will take months to remove it all. Michael examined a seemingly innocuous light fixture that had concealed a high-resolution camera. She didn't just steal properties. She transformed them into intelligence-gathering facilities. Every renovation, every upgrade she suggested, it was all part of her surveillance network. The restoration process had revealed the true sophistication of Diana's operation. Each property had been modified to serve her broader aims, often in ways that were difficult to detect or remove. The Swiss resort alone had contained enough surveillance equipment to monitor every conversation in the building. "The prosecutors have a new challenge," Detective Romano shared as we inspected the resort's conference facilities. "Diana's modifications to these properties may have actually increased their value, but the improvements were made with criminal intent and criminal funds. They're debating how to handle the legal implications. The complexity extended beyond physical modifications. Diana's careful documentation had revealed that many properties were entangled in elaborate financial structures, making straightforward restitution impossible. Some had been used as collateral for loans. Others were part of complex international investment schemes. Susan arrived that afternoon to discuss the restoration of her Tuscan villa. "The local authorities found a hidden room filled with servers," she reported. Years of recorded conversations, stored data, surveillance footage, all gathering dust while Diana used the information for her schemes. The task force had established a special unit just to handle the property restorations. Each case presented unique challenges, requiring careful legal and financial navigation. Diana's network had been so intertwined with legitimate businesses that separating criminal activities from legal ones proved daunting. "We've discovered something interesting," Marco announced, joining us in the resort's main office. Diana didn't just monitor these properties. She created a sophisticated data analysis system. The surveillance wasn't random. She was specifically gathering information about financial markets, political decisions, and international relations. The Henderson estate had yielded similar findings. The diplomatic meetings held there had been carefully recorded and analyzed, with Diana using the gathered intelligence to inform her investment strategies and blackmail operations. The property itself had become almost secondary to its value as an intelligence-gathering hub. "The question now," I explained to the assembled property owners, "is how to restore these places without destroying potential evidence. Some of the surveillance systems may still contain crucial information about ongoing investigations." The process of reclaiming properties had also revealed the human cost of Diana's schemes. Families had been displaced, lives disrupted, and communities affected by her machinations. Each restoration brought new stories of how her actions had rippled through people's lives. "We're not just returning buildings," Michael observed, watching Thomas reset the resort's security systems. "We're trying to restore people's sense of security, their trust in ownership. Mom didn't just steal properties, she stole peace of mind." The technical challenges were matched by psychological ones. Many victims struggled with the idea of returning to homes that had been so thoroughly violated. Diana's surveillance had created a lingering sense of vulnerability that simple property restoration couldn't address. "We're establishing a support network," I announced to the group. "Legal assistance, technical sweeps, psychological support, everything needed to help people truly reclaim their spaces. It's not enough to just return the properties. We need to help restore what was lost intangibly as well." As evening approached, we gathered in the resort's grand dining room, where Diana had once hosted elaborate parties while secretly recording her guests' conversations. Thomas had decided to temporarily close the resort for a complete renovation, removing every trace of Diana's modifications. "It's strange," he mused, looking around the room. "Everything looks the same on the surface, but knowing what happened here, what this place was used for, it changes how you see it. We're not just renovating the building, we're trying to reclaim its soul." The restoration process would continue for months, possibly years. Each property represented a piece of Diana's elaborate puzzle, and untangling her web of influence required patience and dedication. But watching Thomas and the other owners begin to reclaim their spaces, I saw hope emerging from the shadows of Diana's deception. "We'll need to be thorough," Detective Romano cautioned as we prepared to leave. "Diana's attention to detail means there could be layers of surveillance and modification we haven't discovered yet. Each property needs to be carefully examined and cleared before it can be fully restored." Michael took a final look around the resort where he had spent childhood vacations, now seeing it through new eyes. Mom tried to build an empire by taking from others. Maybe the best revenge is helping her victims rebuild something better, something based on truth rather than deception. The sun set behind the Swiss Alps, casting long shadows across the resort's grounds. The process of restoration was just beginning, but each property returned, each surveillance system dismantled, represented another step toward healing the wounds Diana had inflicted. Her empire had been built on stolen spaces and stolen secrets. Its dismantling would be built on restoration and renewal. 4 months after Diana's arrest, the Blackwood family gathered at our newly restored villa on the Amalfi Coast. The property had been swept for surveillance equipment, renovated to remove Diana's modifications, and reclaimed as a space for healing rather than deception. Michael had insisted on hosting this family reunion, believing it was time to confront the past and forge new bonds built on truth. James Blackwood, Charles's brother, arrived first, bringing with him a box of old family photographs he had discovered while cleaning out his attic. "I found these yesterday," he explained, spreading them across the dining room table. Pictures of the real Eleanor Blackwood from college. I thought we should all know the truth about who she was before Diana stole her identity. The photographs showed a gentle-faced woman with kind eyes, so different from the calculating gaze we had come to know. Michael studied them intently, seeing for the first time the woman his father had originally loved, the life that might have been if Diana hadn't orchestrated her elaborate deception. "She looks happy," Michael observed softly, touching a photo of Eleanor at a college party. "Natural, not like Mother, who always seemed to be performing even in casual moments." Charles's sister Margaret joined us, bringing her own memories of the real Eleanor. "She was shy, thoughtful, nothing like the woman Diana pretended to be. When Diana took over Eleanor's life, none of us questioned the personality change because we assumed grief over her mother's death had transformed her. We accepted the lies because they were easier than facing the truth." The family gathering grew as more relatives arrived, each bringing pieces of the past to share. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had been distant during Diana's reign now came together, united by their shared experience of deception and their determination to rebuild authentic relationships. "I found Diana's wedding video," Thomas announced, setting up his laptop. "Watch how she mimics Eleanor's mannerisms from these old photos. The way she tilts her head, the slight smile, it's all carefully copied. She studied Eleanor like an actor preparing for a role." Detective Romano had joined us, both as a friend and as part of the ongoing investigation. "Diana's performance was masterful," she noted. "She didn't just copy Eleanor's superficial traits, she created a new version of Eleanor that people wanted to believe in. Confident, sophisticated, successful, she gave the family an Eleanor they could be proud of, even if it was all fabrication." The day progressed with shared meals and honest conversations. Old hurts were acknowledged, misunderstandings cleared up. Many family members had felt manipulated by Diana over the years, but had never spoken up, fearing they were alone in their doubts. "She played us against each other," Margaret reflected during dinner. "Created little rivalries, spread subtle rumors. We stopped trusting each other because she made sure we never communicated openly. That ends today." Michael had been quiet through much of the gathering, absorbing the stories and memories. Finally, he stood to address his assembled family. "I've struggled with who I am since learning the truth about my mother," he admitted. "But looking around this table, I realize that my true family isn't defined by Diana's lies. It's defined by how we choose to move forward together." The conversation turned to the future. Plans were made for regular family gatherings, genuine ones without hidden agendas or surveillance equipment. The villa, once Diana's tool for manipulation, would become a place of honest connection and healing. "We're establishing a family trust," I announced, sharing the legal framework we had developed. "A transparent one, designed to support each other and prevent anyone from ever again using property or wealth as weapons against family members." James raised his glass in a toast. "To truth," he said simply, and the words echoed around the table with new meaning. As evening fell, we moved to the terrace where Diana had once plotted her schemes. The same view that had witnessed so many manipulations now watched over a family being reborn. The sound of genuine laughter replaced the whispered conspiracies of the past. "I found something else in the old records," Margaret said quietly, joining Michael and me by the railing. "Letters from your father to the real Eleanor, written before Diana took her place. He wrote about wanting a simple life, a honest love. Diana gave him wealth and status instead, thinking that's what would make him happy." Michael gazed out at the darkening coastline. "She never understood that real happiness comes from authentic Connections, not power or control. Everything she built was hollow because it was based on lies. The night grew late, but no one seemed eager to leave. This gathering represented something precious, the first true family connection many of them had experienced in decades. Diana's web of deception had been replaced by a network of genuine relationships. "We can't erase what happened," I observed, watching the family interact with new openness. "But we can learn from it. Every lie Diana told shows us the importance of truth. Every manipulation teaches us the value of authenticity." The villa, cleansed of its surveillance equipment and dark secrets, had become a symbol of renewal. The same walls that had once recorded countless deceptions now witnessed the rebuilding of trust, one honest conversation at a time. As the family gathering continued under the stars, it was clear that Diana's greatest failure wasn't getting caught. It was never understanding that real power comes from genuine connections, not calculated manipulation. While she had spent decades building an empire of lies, she had missed the opportunity to experience the true wealth of authentic family bonds. 1 year after Diana Wells attempted to steal our villa, I stood in the newly established Blackwood Foundation's headquarters in Boston, watching as Michael addressed a room full of property fraud victims. The foundation, created from recovered assets of Diana's criminal empire, had become a beacon of hope for people rebuilding their lives after similar schemes. "When my mother tried to steal my wife's property," Michael began, his voice steady and confident, "she inadvertently created something she never intended, a movement dedicated to preventing others from experiencing what we endured. Today, we're not just helping people recover stolen properties, we're revolutionizing how we protect property rights globally." The foundation had evolved beyond our initial vision. Working with international law enforcement and legal experts, we had developed new protocols for identifying and preventing sophisticated property fraud. Diana's methods, now thoroughly documented, had become a case study in how to recognize and stop similar schemes. Detective Romano, who had relocated to Boston to head our security division, presented the latest statistics. In the past year alone, we've helped recover over 200 properties across 12 countries. More importantly, we've prevented nearly twice that number of attempted frauds using the warning signs we learned from Diana's operations. The Foundation's work had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Government agencies sought our expertise in protecting sensitive properties. Financial institutions implemented our security protocols. Even technology companies consulted with us about preventing digital property theft. The latest from the prosecutors, Marco announced, joining us after a court session. Diana's appeals have all been denied. Her network has been completely dismantled, her assets seized, and her influence neutralized. But perhaps most significantly, her methods have been turned against future fraudsters. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Diana's sophisticated schemes intended to build her empire had instead created the tools for preventing similar crimes. Her expertise in exploitation had been transformed into protection for potential victims. Susan, now heading our victim support program, shared success stories from recent cases. "We're not just helping people reclaim properties," she explained to the assembled group. "We're helping them reclaim their sense of security, their trust in ownership. Every person we help represents a victory over the kind of manipulation Diana perfected." The Foundation's headquarters occupied a historic Boston building, its architecture a stark contrast to the modern technology we use to track and prevent property fraud. In the research division, analysts studied patterns of fraudulent activity, developing algorithms to detect suspicious property transfers before they could be completed. We've identified 3 new variations of Diana's methods being attempted. In Europe, Thomas reported from his position monitoring international cases. But because we understand how she operated, we've been able to stop them before any properties were lost. Michael's medical background had proved unexpectedly valuable in our work. His understanding of trauma had helped shape our victim support services, ensuring we addressed both the practical and emotional impacts of property fraud. The hardest part for most victims isn't losing the property, he observed during a staff meeting. It's losing their sense of trust, their feeling of security in their own homes. That's why our approach has to be comprehensive: legal, financial, and psychological support working together. The foundation's impact extended beyond property recovery. We had created educational programs for real estate professionals, legal workshops for property owners, and support groups for fraud victims. Diana's attempt to steal our villa had sparked a global movement for property rights protection. James Blackwood, who had joined our board of directors, summarized our progress during the annual review. In trying to destroy one family's security, Diana inadvertently created a system that protects thousands. Her legacy isn't the empire she tried to build, but the safeguards we've created to prevent others from following her path. As evening approached, I found Michael in his office, reviewing plans for the foundation's international expansion. On his desk sat a small photo of Diana, not in her Eleanor Blackwood persona, but her original Iowa driver's license picture, before she began her decades of deception. "Sometimes I wonder," he said, noticing me looking at the photo, "if she ever imagined this outcome. All her careful planning, all her manipulation, leading to the creation of something dedicated to stopping people like her." The foundation had become more than just a response to Diana's crimes. It represented a new approach to property rights, combining legal expertise, technological innovation, and human compassion. We had transformed a story of betrayal into one of protection and renewal. "The prosecutors called today," I shared, settling into a chair across from him. "They've discovered Diana kept a journal in prison, detailing her thoughts on how her empire fell. She wrote something interesting, that her greatest miscalculation wasn't underestimating our legal skills or detective work. It was not understanding that genuine connections are stronger than any network built on manipulation." Outside the foundation's windows, Boston's skyline glowed in the twilight. Somewhere in a federal prison, Diana Wells contemplated the unexpected transformation of her life's work. Her attempt to steal our villa hadn't just failed. It had catalyzed a movement that would prevent countless others from suffering similar fates. As we prepared to leave for the day, Michael paused in the doorway. "You know what Mom never understood?" he said thoughtfully. "Real power isn't in taking from others or manipulating their trust. It's in helping people stand strong, in turning bad experiences into positive change." The foundation's lights dimmed, but its mission continued. Across the world, people slept more securely in their homes because Diana's schemes had taught us how to protect them. Her greatest legacy wasn't the empire she built, but the safeguards created from its ruins. What began with one attempted property theft had evolved into a global force for positive change. Diana had tried to steal our villa, but instead, she had given us something far more valuable: the knowledge and motivation to protect others from experiencing what we had endured. The story that started on that sunny day in Italy had transformed into something none of us could have predicted. Through the Foundation's work, we had proven that the strongest structures aren't built on deception and fear, but on truth, justice, and the commitment to helping others rebuild their lives.